Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I can't believe it's been 3 days since the hunting trip with my brother Mark in Chalk Creek, and I still haven't been able to sleep properly. I keep replaying everything in my head, trying to make sense of what we saw, but I can't. I've hunted in those Utah mountains for 15 years now, and nothing like this has ever happened before. It was supposed to be a normal trip, just me, Aaron, and Mark heading out to Summit County like we do every fall. We've been hunting these same areas for years, and we know Chalk Creek like the back of our hands, or at least I thought we did. We set out early that morning, around 5:30. The day had been pretty uneventful. Saw a few does, but nothing worth taking a shot at. By late afternoon, we had wandered deeper into this canyon than we usually go. It wasn't a big deal. We just had to climb out before it got too dark. Mark and I got separated from Aaron for about an hour, which happens sometimes, but we had our radios. The sun was starting to set when we began making our way out of the canyon. The light was that weird, dusky orange-purple, and shadows were getting longer by the minute. You know that time when your eyes start playing tricks on you, when every tree stump starts looking like something else? That's exactly when it happened. We were almost at the top of this small draw where it opens up into a meadow. I was about 10 feet ahead of Mark, and I remember being out of breath from the climb. The air was getting colder, and I was thinking about how good a hot meal would taste when we got back to camp. That's when I saw it. About 30 yards ahead of us, moving through a small cluster of aspen trees, was this figure. Dark, massive. I'm talking way bigger than a man. The light was bad, but I could tell it was moving on 2 legs. My first thought was bear, but it didn't move like a bear. Bears don't walk upright that smoothly, especially not through trees. I froze in my tracks, and Mark nearly bumped into me. I remember putting my arm out to stop him, not even taking my eyes off the thing. Neither of us said a word. We just stood there watching. Then it made this sound. Jesus, I still get goosebumps thinking about it. It wasn't a roar or a scream. It was this deep, forceful grunt that seemed to come from something with massive lungs. The sound echoed a little in the canyon, and I swear I felt it in my chest. Before I could even process what was happening, this thing reached down, grabbed a dead tree limb. Not a small branch, I'm talking a limb that would take me some effort to lift, and just hurled it, threw it like it was nothing. That limb flew at least 15 feet through the air before crashing into the underbrush. The casual strength behind that throw, it wasn't normal. Mark, who's always been the more impulsive one between us, started slowly raising his rifle. I don't think he was actually going to shoot, just a reflex from years of hunting. The second that rifle started moving up, though, we heard it, this low, rumbling growl coming from within the pines nearby. I've worked at Lagoon Amusement Park in Farmington for 3 summers, feeding the animals. I've heard all kinds of growls, bears, mountain lions, you name it. This growl, it reminded me of a leopard, but deeper, more guttural. I used to feed this old leopard named Samson, and his growl would send chills down my spine every time. This was like that, but worse, much worse. And then came the chattering. I don't know how to describe this sound. It was like teeth clicking together rapidly, almost mechanical, but definitely coming from something alive. Click, 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 fast, rhythmic, and completely unnatural. It wasn't an animal sound I've ever heard before. The chattering seemed to be coming from the same direction as the growl, but possibly from something else entirely, like there was more than one of whatever these things were. The dread that washed over me in that moment was unlike anything I've ever felt. It wasn't just fear, it was this primal sense that we were in the presence of something that shouldn't exist, something that was watching us, sizing us up. My mouth went completely dry, and I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. Mark and I didn't run. Running would have been stupid. You don't run from predators. Instead, we started backing away, step by step, down the path we'd just climbed. My legs felt like jelly, but I forced them to move. We kept our eyes fixed on those trees the whole time, watching for any movement. The weird thing is, the creature, or creatures, didn't follow us, at least not that we could see. But they didn't leave either. We could still hear occasional rustling, that clicking sound, and once more that deep grunt. They were letting us know they were still there, still watching. It took us about 20 minutes to back down that path to where it felt safe enough to turn around. Neither of us spoke a single word the entire time. We just kept moving, kept breathing, kept our eyes forward. When we finally got around a bend in the canyon where we couldn't see the meadow anymore, Mark finally whispered, "What the fuck was that?" I didn't have an answer. I still don't. We practically ran the rest of the way back to our meeting point with Aaron. He was already there, looking worried because we were late. When we told him what happened, I could tell he didn't fully believe us at first, but he knows his brother well enough to see when I'm genuinely terrified, and I was. The three of us decided to head back to camp immediately, even though it meant hiking in near darkness. Nobody wanted to stay in that canyon a minute longer than necessary. We had our headlamps, and we stuck close together. The hike back was tense. Every sound in the forest made us jump. At one point, we heard a branch snap somewhere behind us, and we all froze. Aaron raised his rifle, scanning the trees with his light, but we saw nothing. Could have been anything. A deer, an elk, who knows? But we all felt like we were being followed. When we finally reached our truck, we threw our gear in and got out of there fast. The relief of sitting in that truck, with the doors locked and the engine running, was overwhelming. But even as we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd encountered something that we weren't supposed to see. Back at our cabin, we spent half the night talking about what Mark and I had seen. Aaron kept suggesting logical explanations. A moose, but moose don't throw things. A bear. Bears don't walk upright for that long. Even other hunters playing a prank. Who could throw a tree limb that far? None of it fit. I've been hunting my whole life. I know what a bear looks like, even in bad light. I know what a moose sounds like. This wasn't either of those. The way it moved was too fluid, too purposeful. And that chattering sound. No animal makes a noise like that. Mark suggested it might have been a Sasquatch, but I've never believed in that stuff. Still, after what I saw, I'm not so quick to dismiss it anymore. Whatever it was intelligent enough to warn us away rather than attack. It was territorial, but not immediately aggressive. It wanted us gone, not dead. 3 days later, and I still can't stop thinking about it. I've barely slept. Every time I close my eyes, I see that dark figure moving through the aspens. I hear that clicking sound. I feel that inexplicable dread washing over me again. The worst part is not knowing, not being able to explain it, even to myself. I've gone over it 1,000 times in my head, trying to find a rational explanation, but I always come back to the same conclusion. What we saw in that canyon wasn't something that's supposed to exist. I called the local ranger station yesterday, trying to be casual, asking if there had been any unusual animal sightings in the Chalk Creek area. The ranger just laughed and asked if I'd seen the Summit County monster. Apparently there have been stories over the years, hunters claiming to see strange things in those woods, especially at dusk. He thought I was just adding to the local legend. But I know what I saw, I know what I heard, and I know that I'm never going back to that part of Chalk Creek again. Some places in the wilderness should just be left alone. Some things aren't meant to be found. I'm writing this down partly to process it, partly to see if anyone else has experienced something similar. Has anyone else heard that chattering sound in the Utah backcountry? Has anyone else felt that specific kind of dread that goes beyond normal fear? I need to know I'm not crazy, that what Mark and I experienced was real. Because if it was real, then there's something out there in those mountains that science can't explain, and it knows we saw it. Story 2. I've debated posting this for a long time. I guess I'm still trying to make sense of what happened that night back in the early 90s. My kids are grown now, but they still remember it too, even though they never actually saw what I saw. Maybe writing it all down will help me process it. I don't know. This happened in '93 when my family and I were driving back from visiting my wife's parents near Richland, Missouri. It was late, probably around 11 at night, and we were heading north on Route 7, about 4 miles south of Camdenton. My wife was asleep in the passenger seat, and our 2 kids, Tommy, 7, and Sarah, 9, were in the back seat, fighting sleep but mostly quiet at that point in the drive. I'd been putting off a bathroom break for the last 20 miles, but I couldn't hold it anymore. There weren't many gas stations open at that hour in that part of Missouri, and I was getting desperate. I spotted this small access point off the road, not really a rest area, just a wide spot where the shoulder expanded a bit, into a gravel area near some woods. There was nobody else around, and it was pitch black except for our headlights. I pulled over and put the car in park, but left the engine running with the headlights on. I told the kids I'd be right back and to stay in the car. My wife didn't even stir. She was completely out after the long day at her parents' place. It was one of those warm Missouri summer nights, but there was something odd about the air when I stepped out. It felt heavy somehow, like right before a storm, but the sky was clear with stars visible through the trees. The woods were dense around that little pull-off, tall oaks and pines that seemed to swallow the light from the car. I remember thinking it was eerily quiet. No crickets, no frogs, nothing but the sound of our car engine. I walked around to the passenger side, planning to duck into the edge of the trees to relieve myself. I'd only taken a few steps away from the car when I heard it, a sound that still gives me chills when I think about it. It was the distinct crack of branches breaking, but not like a squirrel or raccoon moving through underbrush. These were substantial branches, snapping under significant weight. Then came the rustling sound of something large moving through the undergrowth. My first thought was bear, even though I knew black bears weren't common in that part of Missouri back then. Maybe a deer, but it sounded too deliberate, too heavy. I froze, squinting into the darkness beyond the reach of my headlights. That's when I felt it. This overwhelming sense that something was watching me. Not like when you're alone in the woods and get spooked by your imagination. This was primal, real. The hair on my arms stood up, and I got this cold feeling in the pit of my stomach. I slowly turned my head toward the sound, and that's when I saw it. No more than 6 or 8 feet away, partially hidden behind some small trees at the edge of the woods, was a face. Not a human face, not an animal. A face I recognized. This thing was massive. The face alone was probably twice the size of mine. It was framed by thick, light brown hair that looked almost golden where the car's headlights caught it. The eyes reflected the light slightly. Not the bright eyeshine you get from a deer, but a dull, intelligent reflection. I couldn't move. I literally couldn't make my legs work. The creature and I just stared at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably only seconds. Everything went completely silent, even the usual forest sounds that had started up again after I stopped moving. It was like the whole world was holding its breath. Then it made this sound, a deep, rumbling growl that I felt more than heard. It wasn't like a bear or any animal I've ever heard. It was deeper, more purposeful somehow. Then, without warning, it lunged forward 2 steps toward me. It didn't fully come out of the tree line, but it moved with shocking speed for something so large. When its hands, and they were hands, not paws, hit the ground, I swear I felt a vibration under my feet. The creature then did something I'll never forget. It exhaled sharply through what I assume was its nose, this huffing sound like an angry bull, but much louder, much more threatening. A hot, musky smell hit me a second later. That smell is what finally broke my paralysis. I ran. I've never moved so fast in my life. I sprinted back to the driver's side of the car, fumbling with the door handle like an idiot in a horror movie. I practically dove into the seat and slammed the door shut, locking it instantly. My wife jerked awake, asking what was wrong. I couldn't even speak. I just threw the car into drive and hit the gas so hard we fishtailed on the gravel. As we pulled away, I caught a glimpse in the rearview mirror of something large moving back into the deeper shadows of the forest. Just a shape, a massive silhouette retreating from the edge of our headlights' reach. "Dad, what's wrong?" Tommy asked from the back seat. "My neck feels funny." Sarah chimed in too. "Me too. It feels like when you rub a balloon and your hair stands up." That's what freaked me out almost as much as what I'd seen. They had felt something, some kind of presence or energy, even from inside the car, without seeing what I saw. My wife kept asking what had happened, but I couldn't explain it yet. We drove the rest of the way home in silence, me constantly checking the rearview mirror like whatever it was might be following us. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I couldn't stop shaking. When we finally got home, the kids went straight to bed, still talking about the weird feeling they had experienced. Only then did I tell my wife what I'd seen. She looked at me like I was crazy at first, suggesting it was probably just a bear. But bears don't make the ground shake when they move. Bears don't have faces that look almost, I don't want to say human-like, because it wasn't, but it wasn't fully animal either. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying those few moments in my head. The way it moved, the intelligence in its eyes, the deliberate way it had stepped forward, like it was deciding whether to come after me or not. The next day, I called a buddy who worked for the Missouri Department of Conservation. Without telling him exactly what I'd seen, I asked if there had been any unusual animal sightings in that area. He laughed and asked if I was talking about the Momo legends, Missouri's version of Bigfoot. I quickly backtracked, embarrassed, and he went on about how every few years someone claims to see something in the woods. I've never been one to believe in monsters or cryptids or whatever you want to call them. I'm a practical guy, worked in construction my whole life, deal with concrete things I can see and touch. But what I saw that night wasn't a bear, it wasn't a man in a suit, it was something else. For years afterward, I avoided driving that stretch of Route 7 at night. When we did have to pass through there during daylight, I never stopped, not even when the kids needed a bathroom break. We'd always push onto Camdenton where there were gas stations and people around. The strangest part? About a year later, there was a small article in the local paper about unusual tracks found in that same general area. The article was vague, mentioning unidentified large animal prints that some local claimed were from a Bigfoot. The paper treated it as a joke, of course. I didn't. My kids still remember that night, not for what they saw, but for what they felt. Sarah, now in her 30s with kids of her own, still talks about the electric feeling she experienced. Tommy says he remembers feeling like someone was watching our car, even though he couldn't see anything through the windows. As for me, I've never told this story publicly before. My wife eventually convinced herself I'd seen a bear, and I let her believe that. It's easier than the alternative, that there's something out there in the Missouri woods that science can't explain. I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And sometimes, when I'm driving on a dark rural road at night, I still catch myself checking the tree line, watching for movement, listening for that huffing sound. And I never, ever pull over in isolated areas after dark anymore. I still can't explain what happened that night. Maybe I never will, but it was real, whatever it was. And it's still out there. Story 3. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened that night in March 2014. My son Jeremy and I were heading to my mum's place near Moorhead, Kentucky. It was just after dusk, that weird time when everything starts to look a little different in the fading light. Jeremy was 10 at the time, playing some game on his tablet in the passenger seat. I remember he had his headphones on, completely, zoned out like kids do. The road to Mom's house is this narrow, winding back road that cuts through dense woods for about 3 miles before you reach her property. There are no streetlights out there, and houses are few and far between. We were about half a mile from Mom's driveway when I first noticed something wasn't right. The woods seemed quieter than usual. Normally you'd hear all kinds of wildlife, especially in March when things are starting to wake up after winter. But that evening, there was this eerie silence that made me turn down the radio. "Dad, why are you slowing down?" Jeremy asked, finally looking up from his game. I wasn't even aware I had eased off the gas. "Just being careful," I said, though honestly something in my gut was telling me to pay attention. That's when I saw it. About 150 feet ahead, illuminated in my headlights, was something standing motionless in the middle of the road. At first, my brain tried to make sense of it. Was it a bear? A particularly large deer? But within seconds, I knew it wasn't anything I'd ever seen before. I hit the brakes, not hard enough to skid, but enough to bring us to a controlled stop about 100 feet away from whatever was standing there. The headlights were hitting it at chest level, and that's when the reality of its size hit me. This thing was massive, easily 7 or 8 feet tall. It had the proportions of a linebacker, with shoulders that must have been at least 3 feet across, and thick, powerful-looking limbs. "Dad?" Jeremy's voice had that slight tremor kids get when they're trying to be brave. "What is that?" "I'm not sure, buddy," I said, keeping my voice steady even though my heart was racing. "Just stay in the car." The creature was covered in medium to dark brown fur that looked coarse and thick, maybe 2 or 3 inches long. What struck me as odd was that the fur had these subtle striping patterns, darker in some places than others. It wasn't a solid color, like a bear's coat would be. The strangest part? It was just standing there, perfectly still, facing toward the river that runs parallel to the road about 50 yards through the trees. It didn't acknowledge our presence at all. No head turn, no startled movement when our headlights hit it. Nothing. It was like we weren't even there. I should have been terrified. Every logical part of my brain was screaming that we should back up, turn around, get the hell out of there. But instead, both Jeremy and I were overcome with this bizarre sense of wonder, awe even. It wasn't threatening us. It wasn't doing anything at all. It was just existing in that space, and somehow we felt privileged to witness it. "Can we get closer?" Jeremy whispered, his face pressed against the passenger window. "No way," I replied, though part of me wanted to. "We're staying right here." For what felt like forever, but was probably only 2 or 3 minutes, we just sat there, engine idling, watching this impossible creature standing in the road. I remember noticing that I could see its breath in the cool March air. Slow, measured breaths that somehow made it seem more real, more present. Eventually, I remembered why we were on this road in the first place. Mom was expecting us for dinner, and she'd worry if we were late. Her driveway was just ahead, past where the creature was standing. "I'm going to drive to Grandma's now," I told Jeremy, who nodded without taking his eyes off the creature. I put the car in drive and slowly moved forward, keeping to the far side of the narrow road. As we passed, no more than 30 feet from the creature, it still didn't move, didn't turn, didn't acknowledge us in any way. I could see more details as we passed, the massive breadth of its back, the way its arms hung at its sides with hands, paws, that looked too large for even its substantial frame. We turned onto Mom's gravel driveway, the crunch of tires on stone absurdly normal after what we'd just witnessed. I watched in the rearview mirror until the creature was out of sight, still standing exactly as we'd found it. "Dad," Jeremy said as we pulled up to Mom's house, "what was that thing?" "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But let's not mention it to Grandma just yet, okay? Let me think about it first." Jeremy nodded, though I could tell his mind was racing with questions. Mine was too. Dinner was normal enough. Mum had made her famous pot roast. and Jeremy chatted excitedly about school and his upcoming baseball season. I was quieter than usual, still trying to process what we'd seen. After Jeremy went to play video games in the spare room, Mum cornered me at the kitchen table. "Thomas, you've been distracted all evening. What's going on?" I hesitated, not wanting to sound crazy, but this was my mother. If anyone would listen without judgment, it would be her. "We saw something on the road coming in," I started cautiously. "Something I can't explain." As I described the creature, Mum's expression changed from concern to something like recognition. When I finished, she got up and fetched a photo album from the bookshelf. "Your brother and I found something strange back in winter 2012, she said, flipping through pages until she found what she was looking for. "These showed up after a light snow." The photos showed large, deep footprints crossing her 5-acre property. They were clearly not human, too large, with what looked like 5 toes, but a shape unlike any boot or shoe. What struck me most was the pattern, a straight line from the southern edge of her property heading north toward the river. "They showed up regularly that winter," Mom continued, "always the same path, never deviating toward the house or barns. Like whatever made them was just passing through, using these woods as a corridor." "Did you ever see what made them?" I asked, my throat suddenly dry. Mom shook her head. "No, but your brother tried tracking them once. Said they led straight to the riverbank and then disappeared. He figured whatever it was must have crossed the river." The implications hit me hard. Whatever we'd seen tonight wasn't a one-off. It, or others like it, had been using these woods as a passage for years at least. "Why didn't you ever mention this before?" I asked. Mom shrugged. What was I going to say? "Oh, by the way, something unexplainable walks through my property sometimes. I figured it wasn't bothering anyone, so why make a fuss?" That night, after Jeremy fell asleep in the guest room, I sat on Mom's porch with a beer, staring out into the darkness of the woods. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that what we'd experienced wasn't fear. It was a profound sense that we had glimpsed something that existed alongside us, but separate, something that normally chose to remain unseen. The next morning, I walked down to the road to look for tracks or evidence. There was nothing, no footprints, no broken branches, no sign that anything unusual had stood there. But I knew what we'd seen. Over the years, I've done research, looked into local legends, even discreetly asked around Moorhead if anyone else had seen something similar. A few old-timers had stories of something big in the woods, but nothing concrete. Jeremy and I have never spoken about it with anyone else. It's our secret, something special we shared. But every time we visit Mom, we both find ourselves looking out the car windows more intently as we drive down that back road, hoping for another glimpse. What strikes me most, looking back, is how that creature seemed completely indifferent to our presence. Not hostile, not curious, just unconcerned, like we weren't worth noting. It makes me wonder how many times in my life I've unknowingly passed close to something extraordinary that chose not to be seen. I still drive that road several times a year. I've never seen the creature again, but sometimes, especially at dusk, I get that same feeling that something is watching, something is there just beyond where my headlights reach, and part of me hopes that someday it might choose to reveal itself again. To this day, I can't explain what we saw. I've looked into every possible animal native to Kentucky, and nothing matches. Some nights I wonder if I imagined it all, but then I remember Jeremy saw it too. And those photos of tracks in my mom's album. Whatever it was, it seems to have its own purpose, its own path through those woods. It wasn't there for us to see, we just happened to be there when it allowed itself to be visible. And somehow, that makes the whole experience even more profound. Story 4. I still don't sleep well during hunting season, even though it's been more than 30 years since it happened. My wife thinks I'm being ridiculous. Says I should just give up hunting altogether if it stresses me out so much. But how do I explain to her that it's not the hunting that bothers me? It's what's out there in those woods, watching and waiting. This happened back in the fall of '89, just outside Ely, Minnesota. I was 32 then, had been bow hunting since I was 12. My brother-in-law Jake had married my sister about 5 years earlier, and we'd gotten close. He was a city boy originally, but he took to hunting like he was born to it, and we'd go out a few times each season. That particular weekend, we were on my family's land, about 80 acres that had been in the Connolly family since my grandfather bought it in the '40s. I knew every inch of those woods, or at least I thought I did. We'd been out there hundreds of times, my dad, my uncles, and me. Then I started bringing Jake along after he married Sarah. The morning had started like any other hunt. We were in our stands before sunrise, about 300 yards apart. I remember it was cold, not freezing, but that damp, late fall cold that seeps into your bones. There was this low fog hanging between the trees, and the leaves were mostly gone, making that crunchy carpet on the forest floor. Around 4 in the afternoon, I heard Jake signal, 3 short whistles that meant he'd hit something. I climbed down from my stand and made my way over to him. He was excited, said he'd gotten a clean shot on a decent 8-pointer, but the deer had bolted after the hit. "Blood trail's good," Jake said, pointing to dark splotches on the fallen leaves. "But we should give him some time. That's standard practice. You don't chase a wounded deer right away. You give it time to bed down and bleed out. Otherwise, you risk pushing it for miles." So we decided to head back to camp, grab some coffee, and come back in an hour. We returned just as dusk was setting in. The blood trail was easy to follow at first. Bright red droplets every few feet, some smears on fallen logs where the deer had crossed. Jake was ahead of me, flashlight in hand, following the sign. We were maybe 300 yards from where he'd shot it when the trail just stopped. And I don't mean it gradually faded or that we lost it. It literally ended mid-track. One moment there were clear blood spots on dead leaves, and the next, nothing. No more blood, no hoof prints, no sign of the animal changing direction or being dragged away. Just gone. "That's weird," Jake said, sweeping his light in widening circles. "Should be more sign here." I've tracked hundreds of wounded animals in my life. Sometimes you lose the trail, sure, but there's always some indication of where the animal went. Disturbed ground, broken twigs, something, but there was nothing. That's when I noticed the silence. Minnesota woods in fall are never completely quiet. There's always something. Wind in the trees, squirrels chattering, owls calling. But at that moment there was absolute stillness. No insects, no nightbirds, nothing. "You hear that?" I asked. Jake looked up from where he was, searching. "Hear what?" "Exactly. Nothing." We both stood there, and I could see the same uneasiness I felt creeping into Jake's expression. Something was off, way off. We kept looking for the trail for another 15 minutes or so, widening our search pattern. The forest was getting darker by the minute, and our flashlights cut yellow cones through the blackness. That's when we heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps on the forest floor. At first, I thought it might be another hunter, though we were far enough into our property that it seemed unlikely. But these weren't human footsteps. They were too heavy, too purposeful. Whatever was making them was big, much bigger than a person, and it was walking on 2 legs. "Marcus," Jake whispered, his voice tight. "What the hell is that?" I shook my head, my mouth suddenly dry. The footsteps continued, staying about 15 feet away from us, just beyond the reach of our lights. It was pacing parallel to us, not coming closer but not moving away either, like it was escorting us or herding us. We instinctively moved closer together, back to back, sweeping our lights through the trees. The footsteps stopped when we stopped, started again when we moved. This went on for maybe 5 minutes, though it felt like hours. Then it stepped forward, just to the edge of our light, not fully in it, but enough that we could make out its shape. I swear to God it was massive, 7 feet tall at least, maybe 7.5, and broad, shoulders like a linebacker but bigger. I'm not a small guy, 6'1", 200 pounds, but this thing made me feel tiny. It was covered in dark hair, not fur exactly, but hair. I couldn't see its face clearly, just a darker shadow where the head was, but I could feel it watching us, studying us. Then it made a sound. Jesus, that sound. It wasn't a roar, wasn't a growl exactly. It was deeper, more guttural, almost like it started in the creature's chest and rumbled outward. It hit me physically, like a wave of pressure. In 20 years of hunting, I'd heard bears, wolves, coyotes, every animal native to northern Minnesota, and nothing ever sounded remotely like that. Jake's flashlight beam was shaking wildly now. My hand went to the .44 on my hip. We always carried sidearms during bow season, just in case. I didn't draw it, not yet, but I rested my palm on the grip. "Back up," I said quietly. "Slow. Back to camp." We started moving backward, keeping our lights pointed at the thing. It stayed where it was, just watching. We backed up maybe 50 yards before I finally said, "Turn around, let's move faster." We turned and walked quickly toward camp, looking back every few seconds. I didn't see it following, but I could feel it. We made it back to our campsite, and I got a fire going immediately while Jake sat on a log, his face pale. "What the fuck was that, Marcus?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I answered honestly. We stayed up most of the night, taking turns keeping watch. Nothing approached the camp, but I swear I could hear those heavy footsteps circling at a distance, just out of sight. When morning came, we were exhausted but determined to go back and find Jake's deer. I told myself it was probably just a bear we'd seen, a big black bear standing on its hind legs. It didn't explain the bipedal walking or that ungodly sound, but it was the only explanation that made any sense. We returned to where the blood trail had vanished. In daylight, it was even more bizarre. The blood literally stopped mid-drip. There were no drag marks, no sign of struggle, no indication of what happened to the wounded deer. And despite searching in ever-widening circles, we found no tracks from whatever we'd encountered the night before. Not a single footprint, not a broken branch, nothing. The only proof we had that something had been there at all was the fact that Jake's deer was gone, and the unshakable feeling that we'd been watched by something that didn't want us there. We cut our trip short and left that afternoon. On the drive home, Jake asked, "We're not telling anyone about this, are we?" I shook my head. Who'd believe us? For years, I avoided that part of the property. I kept hunting other sections, but never went back to that specific area. Jake never came hunting with me again. He didn't say it was because of what happened, but he always had an excuse ready when I invited him. Then, in 2005, 16 years later, I went back with another friend, Dave. We set up camp about a half-mile from where the incident with Jake had occurred. I hadn't told Dave anything about what happened before. Who wants to sound like a lunatic telling campfire stories about monsters in the woods? The first day went fine. We saw a few deer, but nothing worth shooting. That night, we had a few beers around the fire and turned in around 11. I fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the day's hike. I woke to Dave shaking me frantically. It was about 2 in the morning. "There's something outside," he hissed. I sat up, instantly alert. "What? A bear?" He shook his head. "I heard something messing with the firewood stack. I thought it was a raccoon, but when I shined my light out there..." He trailed off, and I could see genuine fear in his eyes. It was big, Marcus. Really big, standing on 2 legs. It took off down the path toward the deer blind when I hit it with the light. I felt the old fear come rushing back. "Did you see its face?" "No, just a shape. But it was no bear, man. Bears don't move like that." We didn't sleep the rest of the night. At first light, we checked around the camp. The firewood we'd stacked neatly the night before was scattered, and there were broken branches tossed on top. almost like someone had been adding to our pile. There were no clear tracks, just some disturbed earth that could have been anything. We packed up and left. I've never been back to that section of the property. I've tried researching what it might have been. Sasquatch stories are a dime a dozen in the northern woods, but I'd always written them off as nonsense. Now, I'm not so sure. Whatever it was, it took Jake's deer, and 16 years later, it remembered me. Or at least, it remembered my camp. That's what scares me the most. The intelligence behind those eyes in the darkness. The deliberate way it paced us, neither threatening nor retreating, like it was sending a message. I've been back to other parts of the family land many times since, but I always leave before dark now. And I never hunt alone. Sometimes, when the wind is right and the forest gets quiet, I swear I can hear those footsteps again, slow, heavy and purposeful, just beyond the trees, watching and waiting. To this day, I've never found a satisfactory explanation for what happened. The local conservation officers had no reports of unusual wildlife. The few people I've told either think I'm exaggerating or saw a bear, but Jake knows, Dave knows, and somewhere deep in those Minnesota woods, it knows too. Story 5. I've never really told this story to many people. Even after all these years, I still get goosebumps thinking about it. But I need to get this off my chest, and maybe some of you have experienced something similar. This happened back when I was 13, during a Boy Scout camping trip in Pennsylvania. I was always the outdoorsy type. Ever since I could remember, hunting had been my passion. My dad taught me to track, to move quietly through the woods, to respect nature. I practically lived for our weekend trips, and I knew the difference between every animal sound and footprint you'd find in those forests. At least, I thought I did. It was our third night at camp. Most of the troop was hanging out at the main cabin, but my brother Tim was staying in a separate cabin about a quarter-mile down this old two-track road. I needed to borrow his flashlight since mine had died, so I decided to walk over there alone. It was around 9 at night, pretty dark already, but I wasn't scared. This was my element. The road was lined with thick trees on both sides, creating this tunnel effect. There was just enough moonlight filtering through the branches to see where I was going. I remember it was unusually quiet that night. No crickets, no owls, nothing. At the time, I didn't think much of it. As I got closer to my brother's cabin, I could see light spilling from the windows onto the road ahead. I was maybe 50 yards away when everything changed. 2 massive figures stepped out from the tree line onto the road, about 20 feet in front of me. My first instinct was to drop into a crouch, not out of fear initially, but just to get a better look. The cabin light was behind them, casting their silhouettes against the darkness. I froze, completely froze. I remember my heart hammering against my ribs so hard it actually hurt. These weren't people, at least not like any people I'd ever seen. The larger one was enormous, at least 9 feet tall. I'm not exaggerating. I'd been hunting my whole life. I knew how to judge distances and sizes. This thing was massive, with broad shoulders and a distinct shape that was unmistakably humanoid, but wrong somehow. The smaller one still towered at what had to be 7 feet tall, reaching only to the larger one's shoulder. For a second, I thought it might be some kind of prank. Maybe Tim and one of his friends on stilts or something. So I called out, "Tim!" My voice came out as barely a whisper. They stopped instantly, both of them. They turned, not like people turn, but with this fluid, unnaturally quick movement, and seemed to look directly at me. I couldn't make out facial features, just those massive silhouettes against the cabin light. Then, without making a sound, they moved into the trees beside a power line pole, not running, not crashing. Through the brush, like you'd expect from something that size, they just vanished, silent, like shadows melting into darkness. I don't remember deciding to run. I just found myself sprinting back toward the main cabin, branches whipping my face, my lungs burning. I burst through the door, sweaty and pale. Everyone stared at me. Someone asked if I was okay. I mumbled something about feeling sick and spent the rest of the night huddled in my sleeping bag, wide awake, listening to every creak and groan of the cabin. I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen, not then. Who would believe me? I was just a kid. For the remainder of the trip, I stuck close to the group, claiming I had a stomach bug. I couldn't bring myself to walk anywhere alone, especially not at night. The worst part came later when we got home. I couldn't go back into the woods. Me, the kid who lived for hunting, who begged to go camping every weekend. Suddenly I was making excuses, finding reasons to stay home. My dad was confused. My friends thought I was weird. How could I explain that every time I looked at the tree line, I imagined those massive shapes stepping out, that every snapping twig made me jump? This went on for years. I'd force myself to go on family hunting trips, but I'd stay close to my dad, jumping at shadows. I'd make excuses to come back to camp early. I missed out on so many things I used to love because of that night. By the time I got to college, I was sick of living with this fear. I signed up for a stress management class, thinking it might help. For our final exam, we had to face something that caused us anxiety. Most people chose public speaking or confronting a difficult relationship. I chose something else. I decided to go back to those same woods, to that same spot. Alone, overnight. I didn't tell the professor what I was really afraid of, just said I had a fear of being alone in the dark. My paper didn't mention what I'd seen that night as a 13-year-old. How could it? But I knew what I had to do. The drive up there was the longest of my life. My hands were sweating so badly they kept slipping on the steering wheel. Several times I almost turned around, but something pushed me forward. Maybe the need to reclaim that part of myself that had been stolen that night. I arrived in the late afternoon. The camp looked smaller than I remembered, more ordinary. I hiked down that same 2-track road, my heart pounding harder with each step. When I reached the spot, that exact spot where I'd seen them, I set up my tent. Right there, in the middle of the road. The sun started to set. Every instinct screamed at me to pack up and leave. Instead, I built a small fire and sat there, watching the flames, listening to the woods grow dark around me. That night was the longest of my life. Every sound made me flinch. Every shadow seemed to move. I kept imagining those figures stepping out from between the trees. Around 3 in the morning, something crashed through the underbrush nearby, probably just a deer, and I nearly had a heart attack. But I stayed. Until dawn broke, I stayed. Nothing appeared. No 9-foot monsters, no silent giants, just the normal sounds of the forest at night. When the sun came up, I felt different, not cured. I don't think you ever fully recover from something like that, but stronger. I'd faced it. I'd returned to the place of my nightmares and survived. That was 8 years ago now. I've managed to start hunting again, though never alone. I still camp, still hike, still love the outdoors. But something's different. I'm always aware, always watching the tree line. I don't let myself get caught in the dark if I can help it. And I never, ever dismiss the strange sounds people say they hear in the woods. Because I know what I saw that night. It wasn't bears standing on their hind legs. It wasn't people in costumes. It wasn't my imagination. Those were Sasquatch, 2 of them, real as the ground beneath my feet. Nothing will ever convince me otherwise. I've read about other sightings since then. Some match what I saw perfectly. The height, the silence, the way they move. Sometimes I think about reaching out to those people, letting them know they're not crazy, that someone else has seen them too. But mostly I keep it to myself. The woods don't feel the same anymore. There's this knowledge I carry now, this awareness that we're not alone out there, that the forests hide things science hasn't explained. It's changed how I see everything. Sometimes, when I'm out hunting with my buddies and they walk ahead, I'll stop and look back over my shoulder, scanning the trees. And sometimes, just sometimes, I think I catch a glimpse of something watching, something tall and silent just beyond where the light reaches. I still don't know what they wanted that night or why they were there. Part of me is grateful they just disappeared instead of coming toward me. Another part wonders if I'll ever encounter them again. All I know for sure is that they're out there, and that night changed everything for me. I'm not asking you to believe me, but if you're ever in the Pennsylvania woods and the forest goes quiet, too quiet, maybe don't assume you're alone. Story 6. I've never shared this with anyone outside my family and closest friends, but after reading some of the accounts on here, I feel like maybe someone might have experienced something similar. This all happened back in 1978 when I was 14, living in Bowie County, Texas. I've tried to make sense of it over the years, but I still can't explain what happened that November. It started on a Tuesday evening. Me and my buddy Tom were tossing a football around in his front yard as the sun was going down. It was getting dark, but we kept playing because neither of us wanted to go inside yet. Tom had this black lab named Rusty, who was running around with us, barking and trying to get the ball. I remember throwing the ball a bit too hard, and it sailed over Tom's head and landed on the roof of his house. Tom groaned and said he'd go get it. The ball had rolled down to the back of the house, where there was a little shed with a low roof. Tom could climb up on that and then get to the main roof. Rusty followed him around back like he always did. I was just standing there waiting, kicking at the grass, when I heard Rusty make this sound I'd never heard before. It wasn't barking or growling, it was this high-pitched whine that made the hair on my arms stand up. A few seconds later, Rusty came tearing around the corner of the house, running so fast he was practically sliding on the grass. He bolted straight under Tom's dad's car and wouldn't come out. I called for him, but he just cowered there, shaking. That's when Tom came back around the front, walking fast. He didn't have the football, and his face was white as a sheet. "What's wrong?" I asked him. "Where's the ball?" He kept looking back over his shoulder toward the woods behind his house. "There's something back there," he said, his voice all quiet and shaky. "Something big was moving up on that hill." "Like what? A deer?" I asked. He shook his head. "No way. Much bigger. Standing up." He wouldn't say anything else about it, just kept glancing back at the woods. I ended up staying over at Tom's that night since we'd planned it already. Around 10 o'clock, we were in his room playing Atari when he suddenly jumped up and grabbed my arm. "Listen," he whispered. "Do you hear that?" I didn't hear anything at first, but then he pulled me to the back door of the house. When he cracked it open, I heard it, crashing sounds coming from the woods, like something big moving through the trees, breaking branches. It wasn't just a raccoon or possum. The sounds were too heavy, too deliberate. We stood there listening for maybe 5 minutes before Tom's mom made us close the door and go back to our room. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I started to drift off, I'd hear a noise outside and jolt awake. About 3 days later, Tom called me over to his house after school. When I got there, he took me around to the side of the house where his sister's bedroom window was. The ground was muddy from rain we'd had the day before. "Look at this," he said, pointing down. There in the mud were footprints, huge footprints. They looked human-shaped with 5 toes, but they were at least 15 inches long and much wider than any human foot I'd ever seen. They were also really deep in the mud, like whatever made them was incredibly heavy. "My sister said she heard tapping on her window last night," Tom said. "She thought it was me messing with her, but I was asleep." I felt sick looking at those prints. They were just so wrong, too big, too deep. Tom's dad came out and saw us looking at them, and he got real quiet. He told us to go inside and not to tell Tom's mom because she'd just get upset. Later that day, he filled the prints in with dirt from their garden and didn't mention them again. For the next couple weeks, I kept thinking about those prints and the noises we'd heard. I tried to convince myself it was just some local guy playing pranks, but deep down, I knew better. Then, 2 weeks after the footprint incident, me and another friend, Royce, decided to go squirrel hunting. Royce's dad had dropped us off at this spot off Flower Acres Road where there was a big oak flat that was usually good for squirrels. It was around 3 in the afternoon, clear day, not too cold. We'd been walking for maybe 20 minutes when I noticed how quiet it was. Normally in the woods, you hear all kinds of sounds, birds, squirrels chattering, leaves rustling. But that day there was nothing, just dead silence. "You hear any squirrels?" I asked Royce. He shook his head. "Haven't seen anything moving, not even birds." We kept going. Anyway, after a while we spotted a big squirrel nest up in one of the oaks. I raised my .22 rifle and fired a couple of shots into the nest, hoping to scare something out. The sound of the shots echoed through the trees, and then there was silence again. For about 10 seconds. Then we heard it. It was a roar, but not like any animal I'd ever heard, not like a bear or a mountain lion or anything natural. It was so loud it seemed to shake the ground, deep and powerful and angry, and close, too close. Royce and I just looked at each other, both of us with wide eyes. Neither of us could speak. Then we heard branches breaking, like something was moving toward us. "Run," Royce whispered, and we did. We took off running as fast as we could, crashing through the underbrush, not even caring about the noise we were making. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I kept my rifle clutched in my hand, but I knew instinctively it wouldn't do any good against whatever had made that sound. We ran for what seemed like forever. At one point, we passed by a small farm with a cow pasture. The cows were all bunched up together, pushing against each other, mooing in this confused, panicky way. They knew something was wrong too. When we finally reached the main road, we collapsed on the shoulder, gasping for breath. My legs were shaking so bad I could barely stand. Royce's face was scratched from branches, and he had tears in his eyes, though he'd never admit it. "What the hell was that?" he panted. I shook my head. "I don't know. I don't want to know." We walked 3 miles back to town rather than go back into those woods to take our usual shortcut. The final incident happened just a week later. I wasn't there for this one, but my friends Tracy and Tony told me about it right after it happened. They had been riding their bikes on the trails that run through the woods, about a mile from Tom's house. It was around 4 in the afternoon, still daylight. They were taking a break, just sitting on their bikes and drinking some sodas, when Tracy nudged Tony and pointed. About 100 yards away, standing between 2 big pine trees, was what Tracy described as a big man in an Eskimo coat. Just standing there, watching them. Tony said it wasn't a man, though. He said it was too big, too bulky. And the coat wasn't a coat at all. It was hair or fur. They couldn't see its face clearly from that distance, but they both swore it was at least 7 or 8 feet tall. When it realized they had spotted it, the thing turned and ran off into the woods. But it didn't run like a person. Tracy said it took these huge, loping strides, covering ground faster than anything human could. They jumped on their bikes and pedaled away as fast as they could. Tracy's chain came off halfway home, and he said he nearly had a heart attack trying to fix it, certain that at any moment that thing would emerge from the trees. After that, the incident stopped. At least nothing else happened to me or my friends. But word got around town. Other people had stories, livestock acting strange, weird sounds in the night, glimpses of something big moving through the woods at dusk. The adults mostly dismissed it all. Some blamed it on a bear, though there hadn't been bears in that part of Texas for decades. Others said it was just teenagers playing pranks or hunters from out of town, but they didn't see what we saw. They didn't hear what we heard. It's been over 40 years now, and I still get a chill when I go into wooded areas. I moved away from Bowie County years ago, but I've never forgotten what happened that November. Sometimes I try to convince myself it was just my teenage imagination running wild, but then I remember those footprints in the mud, the sound of that roar, the way Rusty hid under that car, trembling. Whatever it was real. And sometimes, on quiet nights when I can't sleep, I wonder if it's still out there in those East Texas woods, watching and waiting. I wonder if other kids have seen it over the years, had the same terror we did. I've never gotten an explanation. Maybe I never will. But I know what I experienced, and no one can tell me different. Story 7. I still get nervous when I think about what happened that summer in '95. I've never really told anyone the full story, not even my wife, because honestly, who would believe it? But I can't keep it bottled up anymore, and I figure people on here might understand, or at least not think I'm completely nuts. I've been fishing my whole life, pretty much since I could walk. My dad taught me, and there's nothing I love more than being out on the water or prepping sites before the season starts. Back in the summer of 1995, my buddy Mark and I had set up 4 bait sites around Union Creek, Oregon. We'd been fishing that area for years. It's beautiful country, lots of good spots if you know where to look. 3 of those sites were in places we'd used before. But that 4th spot, I don't know why we chose it. It was Mark's idea to try somewhere new that year, deeper in Clover Valley, where the trees grow so thick they block out most of the sunlight. From the first time we set it up, something felt wrong about it. You know that feeling when you think someone's watching you? It was like that, but worse, like something was evaluating me. I remember telling Mark, "This place gives me the creeps," and he just laughed it off, said I was being paranoid. Maybe I was. But that feeling never went away whenever we checked that site. The day it happened was a Tuesday in early June, about a week before fishing season officially opened. Mark couldn't make it. His kid was sick or something, so I went alone to refresh all the bait. I saved the Clover Valley spot for last. Honestly, I almost skipped it altogether, but we'd invested time setting it up, and I didn't want to waste that effort. It was around 4 in the afternoon when I turned off the main road onto this old, overgrown logging path. My truck bounced over roots and rocks as I made my way deeper into the forest. The trees seemed to close in the further I went, until finally the road became too narrow and I had to stop and continue on foot. The air was completely still that day. No wind, no birds singing, just silence. I remember thinking how unusual that was. Forests are usually full of noise, even if it's just leaves rustling or squirrels scampering around. But there was nothing. Just the sound of my boots crunching on fallen pine needles and the occasional snap of a twig. The bait site was about a quarter-mile walk from where I'd parked. I had a pack with fresh bait, and I was moving pretty quickly because I wanted to get out of there before dark. That silence was making me uneasy, and the whole time I felt like I was being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck wouldn't lie down. I got to the site, refreshed the bait, and started heading back right away. Didn't even stop to rest like I normally would. Just wanted to get back to my truck and out of those woods. I was about halfway back when it happened. The trail curved around a large stand of pines, and as I rounded that bend, I saw something. Even now, 28 years later, my hands shake when I think about it. About 50 meters ahead of me, crossing the trail from left to right, was this figure. It was massive. I'm 6'1", and this thing towered over any height I could imagine a person being. 7, maybe 8 feet tall. And it crossed the entire width of that trail, which was at least 12 feet across, in a single fluid stride. I froze, completely. Couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even think clearly. My brain was trying to process what I was seeing, but nothing made sense. It wasn't a bear. I've encountered black bears and even a couple of grizzlies over the years of fishing in remote areas. Bears have a distinctive way of moving, even when they're on their hind legs. This was nothing like that. The figure was upright the whole time, bipedal, walking like a person, but with a longer, smoother gait. And it was covered in what looked like dark hair or fur. Not clothes, definitely not clothes. It happened so fast that before I could even think to reach for my phone, one of those old Nokia bricks, or the small camera I sometimes carried, it was gone, disappeared into the thick trees on the right side of the trail. I stood there for what felt like forever, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I remember whispering to myself, "What the hell did I just see?" over and over, like saying it would somehow make it make sense. After a few minutes of just standing there like an idiot, I started to move forward again. I don't know why. Curiosity? Shock? Maybe I thought if I got to where it crossed, I'd see something that would explain it away. A hunter in some weird ghillie suit. A shadow that played tricks on my eyes. Something, anything rational. With each step I took toward that spot, the feeling of dread in my chest got heavier. It was like walking through molasses. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn around and run, but I kept going. I was about 10 meters from where it had crossed when I saw it again, or rather, part of it. Behind a massive cedar tree about 20 feet off the trail, I caught a glimpse of a face peering out at me. Just for a second, but long enough that I'll never forget it. It wasn't human, but it wasn't entirely animal either. The face was dark, almost black, like the face of a mountain gorilla I'd seen at the Portland Zoo once. But the eyes, God, the eyes were what got me. They were set deep under a heavy brow ridge, but they didn't look like animal eyes. There was intelligence there, awareness. It was looking at me like it knew exactly what I was. We stared at each other for maybe 15 seconds, though it felt like hours. I couldn't move, couldn't even blink. Then, slowly, deliberately, it turned and melted back into the trees. No sudden movements, no crashing through the underbrush. It just disappeared, as silent as everything else in that forest that day. The spell broke once it was gone. That crushing sense of dread lifted just enough that I could move again, and I didn't waste the opportunity. I didn't run. Somehow I knew running was the wrong thing to do, but I walked back to my truck as fast as I could without breaking into a sprint. The whole time, my skin crawled with the certainty that it was watching me leave. I fumbled with my keys, dropped them twice before I could get them in the ignition. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip the steering wheel. I remember checking my rearview mirror constantly as I drove out of there, half expecting to see that thing step out onto the road behind me. I drove straight to a diner in Union Creek and sat there for 2 hours, drinking coffee and trying to make sense of what I'd seen. People must have thought I was crazy, sitting there pale and sweaty, jumping every time the door opened. I've spent a lot of time in the wilderness. I've seen bears, cougars, elk, pretty much every animal native to Oregon. What I saw that day wasn't anything I could explain. It wasn't a bear on its hind legs. It wasn't a man in a costume. The way it moved was too fluid, too natural, and those eyes, they weren't the eyes of anything I've ever encountered before or since. Before that day, I'd always laughed at Bigfoot stories, thought people were seeing bears in bad light or getting spooked by shadows and letting their imaginations run wild. I'm not laughing anymore. I never went back to that bait site. Told Mark it had been disturbed by animals and wasn't worth maintaining. We pulled our gear from the other 3 sites at the end of the season, and I made sure we fished different spots the next year. And the year after, that Mark moved to Idaho for work, so we stopped fishing together anyway. I haven't told anyone the full story until now. Not Mark, not my family, no one. Who would believe me? I've spent nearly 3 decades trying to convince myself there must be some rational explanation, but deep down, I know what I saw. I still fish, still spend time in the woods, but I'm more cautious now, more aware of my surroundings, and I never, ever go into remote areas alone anymore. Sometimes, especially when I'm camping and the fire's burned low and the forest goes quiet around me, I feel that same sensation, like I'm being watched. And I wonder if it's out there still, moving silently through the trees, watching and waiting. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it meant me harm or was just curious. All I know is that for 15 seconds in the summer of 1995, I looked into the eyes of something that shouldn't exist according to science. And not a day goes by that I don't think about it. Story 8. I've never told this story to anyone outside my family because honestly, who would believe me? but it's been eating at me for years, and I need to get it off my chest. I grew up in southern Oregon, about 20 miles from the nearest town, in a small house my dad built himself. Our property backed right up to thousands of acres of public forest land, mostly pines with some wetlands and swampy areas scattered throughout. My whole childhood revolved around those woods. By 15, I knew every trail, creek, and hillside within miles of our home. Dad taught me to hunt from the time I could hold a rifle, and tracking was second nature to me. This happened when I was 15, in early October. The weather had just started to turn. Not cold enough for snow yet, but the air had that crisp fall feeling. School had been in session for about a month, and I was in that rhythm of walking home each day, taking my shortcut through the woods instead of following the main road, which would have added an extra 40 minutes to my walk. That day started completely normal. I remember it was a Wednesday because we had PE last period, and I was already tired from running laps. The sky was overcast, but not raining, typical Oregon fall weather. I got off the bus at the main road around 3 in the afternoon and started my usual trek across the public land toward home. The trail I took wasn't official, just a game path that I and a few other local kids had worn down over the years. It cut through about 2 miles of forest, including a stretch of wetland that got pretty mucky after rain. We'd placed some old boards across the worst spots. I was about halfway home, maybe 3/4 of a mile into the woods, when this weird feeling washed over me. It's hard to explain if you've never felt it, but it was like a physical pressure on the back of my neck, that primitive instinct telling you something's watching you. At first, I just stopped and looked around, figuring it was probably a deer or maybe even a bear. I'd seen plenty of both in those woods. Nothing. The forest was weirdly quiet, though. No birds, no squirrels chattering, just the sound of the wind through the pines. I shrugged it off and kept walking, but the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got stronger, making the hair on my arms stand up. I wasn't scared exactly, more alert. I'd been in these woods my entire life. I knew what belonged and what didn't. I remember adjusting my backpack. It was this dark green JanSport that I'd had for like 3 years, and picking up my pace a bit. The trail dipped down toward the wetland area ahead, where it got narrow, and there were some boardwalks we'd made over the swampier parts. That's when I saw it. At first glance, I thought it was someone standing on the trail ahead, maybe 70 or 80 yards away, right where the path met the edge of the swampy section. My immediate thought was, what the hell is someone doing out here? It wasn't hunting season yet, and nobody from town ever came this far into the woods unless they were specifically going somewhere. But as I focused on it, I realized something was very wrong with what I was seeing. The proportions were off, all wrong. It was standing partially behind a tree, not fully visible, but I could tell immediately it was massive, way bigger than any person I'd ever seen. I froze in my tracks. My heart started hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I'm not exaggerating when I say every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, but I couldn't move. I was completely frozen. As I watched, it stepped fully onto the trail. That's when I saw its full size. It was enormous, broad shoulders, incredibly tall, with arms that hung down almost to its knees. It was covered in what looked like dark fur or hair, so dark brown it was almost black. Solid color, no markings that I could see. The thing that really stands out in my memory, even now, was its head. It seemed too small for the massive body, like it wasn't proportioned right. I couldn't make out any facial features from that distance, no eyes or mouth or anything, just this dark shape where a face should be. There was a low-hanging branch just above its head. I remember thinking that branch was at least 8 or 9 feet off the ground because I'd jumped to touch it before when walking that trail. I don't know how long we stood there looking at each other. It felt like forever, but was probably less than a minute. I didn't move. I barely breathed. It didn't move either, just stood there, facing me. I got the distinct feeling it was studying me, just as I was studying it. Then, without any warning, it turned. The movement was smooth but quick, pivoting on one foot and stepping off the trail into the swamp. One step. That's all it took, and it was gone, vanished into the trees. I stood rooted to that spot for I don't know how long, 10 minutes at least. My legs were shaking so bad I wasn't sure they'd hold me. The silence in the forest was absolute. No birds, no wind, nothing. Just me and my thundering heartbeat. Eventually, I managed to get myself moving. Part of me wanted to turn around and run back to the road, but that would have meant an extra hour of walking, and I'd have to explain to my parents why I was late. The idea of telling them what I'd seen was almost as scary as what had just happened. They'd think I was making it up or had seen a bear standing on its hind legs. But I knew what I saw wasn't a bear. I've seen plenty of bears in my life, including standing ones. This wasn't that, not even close. So I kept going forward, moving as quietly as I could, every sense on high alert. When I reached the spot where it had been standing, I stopped. The ground was too firm for footprints, pine needles and hard-packed dirt. I looked for hair or any sign it had been there, but found nothing. I did measure, though. I counted my steps from where I thought it had been standing to where it had disappeared into the trees. 5 of my steps. But it had covered that distance in a single stride, 5 feet in one step, and I'm not a small guy. The branch that had been just above its head, I had to reach up to touch it. I'm 5'10", and I had to stretch my arm fully to brush the bottom of it. That put whatever I saw at well over 8 feet tall, probably closer to 9. I practically ran the rest of the way home. I burst through the front door sweating and out of breath. Mum asked if I was okay, and I just mumbled something about being late for dinner. I couldn't eat that night, couldn't sleep either. I kept replaying what I'd seen in my head, trying to convince myself it was something normal. A hunter in strange clothes, a bear, a moose, though we don't have moose in that part of Oregon. But I couldn't make it fit. What I'd seen wasn't human, and it wasn't any animal I'd ever encountered in all my years in those woods. The next day at school, I asked my science teacher, Mr. Barton, about large animals in the area, trying to be casual about it. He listed the usual suspects: black bears, cougar, elk. When I asked if anything else large lived in the forests around here, he laughed and said, "What, you mean like Bigfoot?" The way he said it made it clear he thought the idea was ridiculous. I never told anyone the full story of what I saw. My dad would have said it was a bear. My friends would have either not believed me or blown it into some crazy story. But I know what I saw. I still went into those woods after that day. Had to, since it was my way home. But I never went alone if I could help it. I started carrying a whistle, and later, when I was older, a pistol. Not that I think either would have helped much if that thing had wanted to hurt me. The strangest part is that I never felt threatened during the encounter. Terrified, yes. Awestruck, definitely. But not like I was in danger. It was more like we'd stumbled across each other, both surprised, both curious. It could have charged me or chased me, but it didn't. It just looked and then left. I've read stories about Bigfoot encounters since then. Some match parts of what I experienced, others don't. I don't know if what I saw that day was a Bigfoot or something else entirely. All I know is that it was real, it was massive, and it changed how I view the forests I grew up in. I still live in Oregon, though not in my hometown anymore. I still hunt and hike and spend time in the woods. But now I always have this feeling that I'm being watched, that there are things in the deep forests that we don't understand and maybe aren't meant to. It's been 12 years since that day, and I've never seen anything like it again. But sometimes, when I'm alone in the woods and the birds go quiet, I get that same feeling on the back of my neck. And I wonder if it's out there, watching, remembering our encounter just as vividly as I do. Story 9. I still can't explain what I saw that night in 1995, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to. Some things are better left unexplained, but it's been eating at me for almost 30 years now, and I need to get it off my chest. I was a sophomore at the University of Saskatchewan back then, 19 years old, and full of that invincible feeling you have when you're young. It was late October, right before Halloween, and a group of us had driven up to Barrier Lake for a weekend party at my buddy Jake's family cabin. There were 6 of us squeezed into Mike's old Chevy Suburban, Mike driving, his girlfriend Steph in the passenger seat, and the rest of us crammed in the back. The weekend had been great, drinking beers, telling stories around the bonfire, hiking through the woods during the day. Normal college stuff, but Sunday night we had to head back to campus. Classes started early Monday, and we all had midterms coming up. We should have left earlier, but you know how it goes. Everyone dragging their feet, cleaning up the cabin, making sure we hadn't forgotten anything. By the time we finally pulled out, it was already getting dark, and the weather forecast was looking grim. About an hour into our drive back, the storm hit. Not just any storm, one of those violent Saskatchewan thunderstorms that make you question whether your car might actually get blown off the road. The rain was coming down in sheets so thick that Mike had to slow to about 40 kilometers per hour, and even then, the windshield wipers couldn't keep up. I was sitting directly behind Steph in the back seat. Jake was next to me, already passed out and snoring against the window, and Emma and Chris were in the very back, whispering about something. The radio was playing low, some classic rock station that kept cutting out every time we hit a pocket of really bad weather. The highway between Barrier Lake and Saskatoon is pretty desolate, mostly farmland, a few scattered houses, and lots of dense forest. At night, during a storm like that, it feels like you're driving through a tunnel. The headlights only illuminate about 10 feet ahead, and beyond that is just darkness. I couldn't sleep, so I was staring out the window, watching the ditches alongside the road. Growing up in rural Saskatchewan, you learn early to keep an eye out for deer. They have a nasty habit of bolting across the road without warning, especially during storms. So I was just doing what came naturally, scanning the tree line, looking for those telltale reflective eyes. We were passing by this stretch of road I knew had an old cemetery off to the right. You couldn't see it from the highway, especially at night, but I knew it was there because my grandpa was buried there. It's one of those small, forgotten places where the headstones date back to the early 1900s. The lightning had been flashing sporadically for about 20 minutes, occasionally lighting up the fields like daylight for a split second before plunging everything back into darkness. I remember checking my watch. It was just after midnight. Mike had turned the radio off completely because the static was getting annoying, and the only sounds were the constant drumming of rain on the roof and the rhythmic swish of the wipers. That's when it happened. There was a series of lightning flashes, maybe 3 or 4 in quick succession, and in those flashes I saw something that I still can't fully process to this day. In the first flash, I caught movement in the field to our right, something tall and black, moving fast, much faster than a person should be able to move. At first, I thought it was just a shadow or maybe a trick of the light. The second flash came a second later, and I saw it clearly. A figure, completely black, like a silhouette cut out of the night itself. It was running through the field toward the road, and there was something deeply wrong about the way it moved. It was definitely humanoid. 2 legs, arms pumping, a head, but the proportions were off somehow. The arms seemed too long, the stride too wide. By the third flash, it had reached the ditch beside the road, and this is where it gets really fucked up. This thing cleared the entire ditch in what looked like a single bound. Not a jump, not a leap, but more like the space between the field and the road just didn't matter to it. The fourth flash showed it crossing the road directly in front of our car. Mike didn't even brake. I don't think he saw it. But this thing crossed the entire width of the highway in what couldn't have been more than a second. Its movements were fluid, but somehow wrong, like watching someone run underwater, but at impossible speed. The final flash showed it disappearing into the trees on the left side of the road. The whole thing lasted maybe 6 seconds, 6 seconds that have haunted me for decades. I remember sitting there, frozen, trying to process what I'd just seen. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I wanted to say something, to shout, to tell Mike to stop the car, but I couldn't find my voice. Then Steph broke the silence. "Did you guys just see someone run across the road?" Her voice was tense, confused. My blood went cold. She'd seen it too. It wasn't just my imagination. Yeah, I saw it," I managed to say, my mouth suddenly dry. Mike slowed the car down even more. "What? I didn't see anything." "There was someone, or something, that just ran across the road right in front of us," Steph insisted, turning in her seat to look back at me. "You saw it too, right, Daniel?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak properly. "What did it look like?" Mike asked, peering intently through the windshield as if whatever it was might come back. Steph and I looked at each other. How could we describe what we'd seen? It was, I don't know, like a person, but... Steph trailed off. "It was completely black," I said. "Like, not just wearing dark clothes, but like a shadow. And it moved wrong. Too fast." Emma leaned forward from the back. "What are you guys talking about?" "We just saw something cross the road," I said, "right in front of us." "I didn't see anything," Chris chimed in. Jake was still asleep, oblivious to the whole thing. Mike slowed the car to a crawl. "Should we go back? Maybe someone needs help?" The thought of turning around and going back to look for that thing made my skin crawl. "No," I said too quickly. "It was moving too fast. It's long gone now." "It couldn't have been a person," Steph said quietly. "No one could move that fast." "Maybe it was a deer," Emma suggested. I shook my head. "It was on 2 legs, running like a person, but not." We drove in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the continuing storm outside. Then Chris, trying to lighten the mood, said, "Hey, wasn't there a graveyard back there? Maybe you guys saw a ghost." We all laughed nervously, grateful for the break in tension. For the rest of the drive, we joked about it, speculating about ghosts and ghouls, trying to turn what we'd seen into something we could laugh about. By the time we reached campus, we'd almost convinced ourselves it was nothing, a trick of the lightning, a deer that looked strange in the flash, our tired minds playing tricks on us. But I couldn't shake it. That night, lying in my dorm room, I kept replaying those 6 seconds in my head. The way it moved wasn't just unusual, it was impossible. Human legs don't work that way. Nothing moves that way. I didn't talk about it much after that night. When I did bring it up with Steph a few weeks later, she seemed uncomfortable and changed the subject. I think we both preferred to pretend it hadn't happened. Years passed. I graduated, got a job, moved to Calgary, built a life. But I never forgot what I saw on that road. Then, about 5 years ago, I fell down an internet rabbit hole reading about Bigfoot encounters. I've never been one for cryptids or paranormal stuff, but something about one account caught my attention. A trucker in northern Alberta described seeing a black figure cross the highway in front of him during a storm, moving with impossible speed. The description matched what Steph and I had seen that night. I started researching more, reading accounts from all over North America. There were surprisingly many reports of similar sightings, always a humanoid figure, always pitch black, always moving with that unnatural speed and fluidity. Some people called it a shadow person, others a skinwalker, others just a thing. The more I read, the more convinced I became that what we saw that night wasn't human, wasn't a bear, wasn't a deer, wasn't anything I could explain. I grew up in farming country. I know every animal that lives in those woods. Nothing moves like what we saw. I tried reaching out to Steph a couple years ago, wanting to compare memories, but discovered she died in a car accident in 2009. That hit me hard, knowing that the only other person who could confirm what I saw was gone. So now it's just me and this memory that won't fade. Sometimes I convince myself it was nothing, just a weird optical illusion caused by the lightning and rain. But then I'll be driving at night during a storm, and I'll catch myself scanning the ditches not for deer, but for that figure. And the fear comes rushing back, as fresh as it was that night in 1995. I don't know what we saw crossing that road near Barrier Lake. I don't know if it was something natural that just looked strange in the lightning, or if it was something else. Something that shouldn't exist in our understanding of the world. But I know what I saw, and nearly 30 years later, I still check the ditches when I'm driving at night, especially during storms. And I still feel that cold knot of fear when lightning illuminates the fields beside the road just for a second before plunging everything back into darkness. Story 10. I've never really shared this before, not in full detail anyway. It's always been this thing my family and neighbors just accepted. But after what happened last month, I need to get this off my chest. I grew up in the southern tier region of New York, in a house that backed right up to the Klipnoki State Forest. If you're not familiar, it's this massive 2,000-acre stretch of woods. Some planted pines, some natural hardwoods, limestone caves, and these winding creeks that cut through everything. It's beautiful, but there's something else there too. Something most outsiders wouldn't understand. Around here, we grew up hearing about the hairy women. I know how that sounds, but it wasn't some joke or scary story to keep kids from wandering too far. It was just knowledge, like knowing there are deer or black bears in the woods. The hairy women were just another thing that lived there. My grandpa mentioned them casually sometimes. My mom would tell me to be respectful of their space. It was normal to us. My first encounter happened when I was about 5 or 6. Mum and I were picking wild strawberries along the edge of our property where it met the forest. It was early June, warm, but not hot yet. I remember being so excited about finding the biggest strawberry I'd ever seen that I ran ahead of Mum, following the berry patches that trailed into the woods. I must have gone in about 50 yards when I heard it. This heavy thud, like something big had jumped down from a tree. Then these slow, heavy footsteps. Whatever it was big, and it was about 200 yards deeper in the red pine section. I froze. The footsteps weren't running, but they were deliberate, coming in my direction. There was this smell too, not horrible but strong, kind of musty and wild, like wet fur mixed with something earthy. I don't know how else to describe it. I didn't look. I didn't want to see. I just turned and ran back to Mom as fast as my little legs could carry me. I was sobbing when I reached her, trying to explain between gasps what I'd heard. She didn't panic though. She just calmly gathered our berries, took my hand, and walked us home, all while saying in this matter-of-fact voice, "That's just one of the hairy women, honey. They're shy. They won't hurt you if you respect their space." And that was it. No big deal. Just another day living next to Klipnoki. As I got older, I spent more and more time in those woods. My friends and I would hike, explore the caves, though Mom always warned us to be careful around them. And eventually, when we were teenagers, we'd camp out there. That's when the encounters got more frequent. During those overnight camping trips, we'd often hear them moving around our campsite after dark. Their footsteps were distinct, lighter than you'd expect for something big, but deliberate. They never came right into camp, just circled around the edges, just beyond where our flashlights could reach. The weirdest thing was how they communicated. These soft whistles, not like a person whistling a tune, but more like signals. 3 short whistles, then a long one. 2 whistles followed by what sounded almost like a throaty hum. They seemed to travel in small groups, at least 3 or 4 based on the sounds coming from different directions. My friend Jessie saw one once when she got up to pee in the middle of the night. She came back white as a sheet, but didn't say anything until morning. She described seeing a tall figure standing between 2 pines about 30 yards from our tent. She said it was covered in dark hair, but stood upright like a person. When she shined her flashlight toward it, It didn't run away. It just slowly turned and walked deeper into the woods. The thing is, we were never really scared. Not back then. It was just part of being in the forest. My dad used to say they were probably just as curious about us as we were about them. They've been here a lot longer than us, he'd say. We're the visitors, not them. Life went on. I graduated high school, started community college, got a part-time job at the hardware store in town. I still lived at home and still spent plenty of time in those woods. It was home, you know. The forest was as much a part of my life as our actual house. Then, about a month ago, everything changed. I'm 21 now. It was a Friday night, and my friend Tyler had come over. We weren't doing anything special, just hanging out, listening to music in my car parked near this old gravel pit about half a mile from my house. The pit's been abandoned for years. It's just this big depression in the ground surrounded by trees, with piles of stones and gravel still scattered around. Local teens use it sometimes to hang out because it's secluded but still has decent cell reception. It was around 11 at night. We had the windows cracked because it was warm for April, and we were just talking about Tyler's new job. Everything was totally normal. The moon was nearly full, casting this silver light over everything. I remember thinking how peaceful it was. That's when we heard it. Heavy footsteps on the far side of the pit, sending loose stones sliding down the incline. At first, I thought it might be a deer, but it was too heavy, too deliberate. Then the sound came. I don't know how to describe it accurately. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal either, not like any animal I've ever heard. It started as this low growl that built into something that sounded almost demonic. Not like movie demon sounds, but something primal and threatening that made every hair on my body stand up. It echoed off the walls of the pit, making it impossible to tell exactly where it was coming from. Tyler and I just looked at each other for maybe half a second before I started the car. I didn't even turn the headlights on at first, just reversed out of there as fast as I could. The tires spun on the gravel before catching, and we shot backward onto the access road. Only then did I flip the lights on and spin the car around. As I turned, the headlights swept across the far edge of the pit. I only caught a glimpse, just for a split second. But what I saw doesn't make sense. It was tall, maybe 7 feet and broad. The hair covered its entire body, but it wasn't like fur, more like long, matted human hair. Its proportions were all wrong. Arms too long, shoulders too wide. But it was the eyes that got me. They caught the headlights and reflected back this reddish-orange glow. Then we were facing the road, and I floored it. Tyler was freaking out, asking what the hell that was. I couldn't answer him. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely keep the car on the road. When I got home, I was still trembling. My mom took one look at me and knew something had happened. When I told her, she got really quiet. Then she asked exactly where we'd been. When I described the gravel pit location, she exchanged this look with my dad that I couldn't read. Later that night, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. My dad said something about territory, and that's where Lisa had her first encounter. That's when it hit me. The gravel pit was only a few hundred yards from where I'd heard that thing jump from the tree when I was picking strawberries as a kid. 15 years apart, same location. The next morning, my dad tried to brush it off. The hairy women don't bother people, he said. Never have. But I pushed back. Dad, this wasn't like before. This wasn't just something passing by. It was angry. It sounded wrong. He got this serious look on his face. Lisa, those woods are changing. There's that new development going in on the north side. They're talking about expanding the hiking trails. More people, more noise. He paused. Things that have lived undisturbed for generations don't always adapt well to change. I've been thinking about that a lot since then, about how I grew up accepting these creatures as just another part of the forest ecosystem. about how we coexisted peacefully for years. But what if that's changing? What if they're feeling threatened? Last week, I drove past the gravel pit in broad daylight. I don't know why. Morbid curiosity, I guess. I noticed something I'd never seen before. On 3 of the trees surrounding the pit, about 8 feet up, there were these deep gouges in the bark. Not like bear claw marks. These were deliberate patterns. 3 vertical lines, then 2 horizontal ones, over and over. Some looked fresh, others weathered and old. I haven't been back to the woods since that night. For the first time in my life, I'm afraid of what's in there. Not just afraid of encountering one of them, but afraid of what they might be becoming, or maybe what they've always been, and we just never noticed. The strangest part? 2 days ago, I found a cluster of wild strawberries on our front porch, just sitting there, arranged in a small pile. No one in my family put them there. They were the first strawberries of the season. I still don't know what to make of that. A warning? A peace offering? All I know is that something has shifted in the relationship between us and whatever lives in those woods. And I'm not sure we're going to like where this new chapter leads. Story 11. I've never been the type to believe in cryptids or monsters. I'm just a regular guy who likes the outdoors, cycling and keeping to myself. But what happened last spring changed something in me. I've kept this to myself for months because, well, who the hell would believe me? But I need to get this off my chest, and maybe someone here has seen something similar. This happened in May 2020, when the world had basically shut down because of COVID. I live near Hartsburg, Missouri. Tiny place, less than 100 people total. It's mostly farmland with the Missouri River nearby and the Katy Trail running through town. During lockdown, I was going stir crazy inside my house, so I started taking these long bike rides. No one was around anyway, so it felt safe. It was a Tuesday morning, warm, but not hot yet. The sky was this perfect clear blue that you only get in spring, and I remember thinking how peaceful everything felt without all the usual traffic and noise. I'd been cycling for about 40 minutes, taking it slow on Lance Road, south of Bush Landing. I was maybe a mile from town. The roads were completely empty. I mean, they're usually pretty quiet out here, but during lockdown, it was like a ghost town. The only sounds were birds, my bike tires on the pavement, and my own breathing. I wasn't wearing headphones because I like to stay alert for cars or farm equipment. I remember noticing how green everything looked. The farmers had just planted soybeans in most of the fields, and the tiny plants were starting to push through the soil. The morning sun was hitting everything just right, and I was just enjoying being outside after being cooped up. That's when I saw it. About 100 meters ahead, something huge moved across the road. At first, my brain tried to make sense of it, maybe a deer, but no, it was walking on 2 legs. A person? But as I kept pedaling, I realized whatever it was way too big to be human. I slowed down, but kept moving forward. The thing wasn't running, but holy shit, it covered ground fast. It took these long, smooth strides, almost like it was gliding rather than walking. It came from the east side of the road, from the direction of the river, and was heading west toward the bluffs. The creature was dark, not black, but a deep brown color. It was covered in hair or fur that moved slightly in the breeze. What confused me at first was a white patch on its chest. My brain immediately tried to rationalize it as a person wearing a white t-shirt, but as I got closer, I could tell the white was part of its body, like a patch of lighter colored fur. The thing never looked at me, never acknowledged me at all. It just moved with this purpose, like it knew exactly where it was going and nothing was going to stop it. I wasn't scared at first, more confused and curious. I kept pedaling, trying to process what I was seeing. When I reached the spot where it had crossed the road, I stopped and looked into the field. By then, the creature was already about 200 meters into the open soybean field, still moving with those impossible strides. That's when the adrenaline hit me. My heart started pounding, and I felt this weird mix of fear and fascination. I've lived in rural Missouri my whole life, I know what bears look like, what deer look like, what every normal animal in these parts looks like. This wasn't any of those things. I remember thinking, holy shit, that's a Bigfoot. I'd never believed in Bigfoot before, never even given it much thought. But in that moment, I knew without a doubt that's what I was looking at. I decided to follow it. In retrospect, that was probably stupid, but I wasn't thinking clearly. There was a dirt farm road cutting through the field, so I turned onto it and started pedaling. I kept my eyes fixed on the creature the whole time. That's when it did something unexpected. Instead of continuing west toward the bluffs, it suddenly turned north, heading toward the Katy Trail. I thought maybe I could intercept it if I cut across at an angle, so I pedaled harder, following the winding dirt road. My breathing was getting heavy, and sweat was running down my back. Not just from exertion, I was nervous. What would I do if I actually caught up to this thing? What if it noticed me and didn't like being followed? But catching up wasn't going to be a problem. Despite my best efforts, the distance between us kept growing. Those long strides were faster than I could pedal on the bumpy dirt road. Every time I thought I might be gaining, it seemed to sense it and move even faster, though it never broke into what I'd call a run. The creature maintained that same smooth, purposeful gait. It was like watching something that's not bound by the same physical limitations as everything else. It moved through that open field like it was nothing, while I was struggling with my bike on the uneven ground. I lost sight of it briefly when it reached a line of trees that separate the fields from the Katy Trail. I pedaled like mad to that spot, abandoned my bike and ran into the trees, hoping to catch another glimpse. The woods were quiet except for my own heavy breathing and the crunch of leaves under my feet. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes, scanning back and forth, listening for any sound that might give away the creature's location. Nothing. Then I heard something that made the hair on my neck stand up. Branches breaking, but not like when a deer moves through underbrush. These were bigger sounds, like something heavy was pushing through the trees, and it was moving fast, heading north along the trail. I ran back to my bike and pedaled to where the dirt road connected with the Katy Trail. By the time I got there, I was drenched in sweat, my legs burning from the effort. I stopped and looked both ways along the trail. Nothing. I decided to head north, in the direction I thought it was going. The Katy Trail is a former railroad line, so it's flat and straight. I figured I'd be able to see pretty far ahead. I pedaled for maybe half a mile, scanning the trail and the woods on either side. Nothing moved except birds and the occasional squirrel. Then I spotted something on the trail ahead, not the creature itself, but evidence it had been there. The gravel on the trail was disturbed in a strange pattern, like something heavy had moved through, leaving deep impressions. And there, clear as day, was what looked like a footprint. I stopped my bike and approached slowly. The print was huge, easily twice the size of my own foot, and I wear a size 11. It wasn't a perfect print, more like a depression in the gravel, but I could make out what looked like 5 toes. The track was so fresh that small pebbles were still settling into place. I looked around for more prints but couldn't find any clear ones, just more disturbed gravel leading north. I followed this trail for another quarter mile before it veered off into dense woods where I couldn't follow with my bike. I stood there for a long time, staring into those woods. Part of me wanted to ditch the bike and continue on foot, but a stronger, more rational part told me that was a terrible idea. Whatever I'd seen was faster than me, stronger than me, and completely unknown. Following it into dense woods alone would be insane. So I turned around and headed back toward town, constantly looking over my shoulder the whole way home. My mind was racing, trying to process what I'd seen. Could it have been a person in a costume, out here in the middle of nowhere during a pandemic lockdown? That made no sense. A bear standing on its hind legs? No way. This thing moved bipedally with a fluidity and speed no bear could manage, and for far too long. When I got home, I immediately went online and started researching Bigfoot sightings in Missouri. Turns out there have been quite a few, especially along the Missouri River corridor. Some descriptions matched what I saw: the height, the coloration, the white chest patch, the incredible speed and stride length. I didn't tell anyone about this for months. My wife would think I was crazy. My friends would never let me hear the end of it. But I know what I saw, and I keep replaying it in my mind. I've gone back to that spot several times since then, hoping to see it again or find more evidence. Nothing, just normal fields, normal woods, normal trails. But every time I'm out riding now, especially near the river or the Katy Trail, I find myself scanning the tree lines and open fields. My heart races whenever I see something move in my peripheral vision. That Tuesday morning changed something fundamental in how I see the world. There are things out there we don't understand, things that move through our familiar landscapes without most of us ever noticing. I never believed the stories before. Now I do. I still can't explain what I saw crossing that road during lockdown. All I know is it was real. It was massive. It moved like nothing I've ever seen before. And for a brief moment, our paths crossed in the quiet Missouri countryside while the rest of the world was holding its breath. Story 12. I still can't believe what my sister-in-law Maria and I saw that evening in 1974. It's been almost 50 years, and I've never told many people about it. Those I did tell either laughed it off or thought I was making it up. But I know what we saw, and it wasn't human. It was late June, one of those perfect California summer evenings when the sky turns golden and everything looks like it's been dipped in honey. I had just picked up Maria from the bus station in San Luis Obispo. Her husband, my brother Carlos, was working offshore on an oil rig, and she was staying with us for a couple weeks while he was gone. We were driving back to Lompoc in my old Ford pickup. Nothing fancy, just a '68 F100 that had seen better days. The radio was playing some Eagles song, and we were chatting about family stuff, catching up since we hadn't seen each other in months. We decided to take the scenic route through wine country rather than the main highway. Just seemed like a nice evening for a drive through the hills. We were about 5 miles outside Paso Robles on one of those winding country roads that cut through farmland and vineyards. The sun was getting low, not quite sunset yet, but that time when shadows start getting long. I remember passing this old farmhouse, white with peeling paint. Looked like it had been there since the 20s at least. Nobody seemed to be around. No cars in the driveway, no lights on. Just this lonely house sitting back from the road, maybe 100 yards with a big oak tree next to it. There was a chicken coop off to one side with a small wire fence around it. The road curved right after the farmhouse, and I had to slow down because it was pretty sharp. That's when it happened. I hit the brakes hard. The truck skidded a little on the gravel at the edge of the road. There was something in the middle of the road, right in front of us. At first, I thought it was a kid. It was about the size of a 12-year-old, maybe 4 feet tall. But immediately I knew something was wrong. The proportions weren't right. The arms were too long, hanging almost to its knees, and it was covered in hair. Dark brown, shaggy hair all over its body. It was crouched down, and I swear to God it was eating a chicken, just tearing into it, feathers and all. I could see blood on its hands, not hands exactly, but hand-like, more like a cross between human hands and animal paws. When our headlights hit it, it looked up. I'll never forget that face as long as I live. It wasn't human, but it wasn't exactly animal either. The face was flatter than a human's, with a wide, broad nose and a mouth that seemed too big. There was less hair on its face than the rest of its body, and I could see its teeth, crooked and yellowish, but definitely not the fangs of a predator. More like human teeth, just wrong somehow. Maria screamed. I think I was too shocked to make a sound. The thing stared at us for maybe 2 seconds, but it felt like forever. Its eyes caught the headlights and reflected back, not red like a deer's would, but a weird yellowish green. Then it moved. Jesus Christ, it moved fast. It stood up on 2 legs, completely upright like a person, and darted to the left of our truck. As it ran past my window, I could see it was still clutching that chicken in one hand. I got a clear look at it, clear enough to see it was male. I know that sounds weird to mention, but it's important because it means this was a real flesh and blood creature, not some ghost or hallucination. It ran past us and then veered right behind the truck. I twisted around in my seat and saw it through the rear window, silhouetted against the evening sky as it leaped over an embankment on the side of the road and disappeared. The whole thing lasted maybe 10 seconds. What the hell was that? Maria was shaking, her hand gripping the dashboard so hard her knuckles were white. I don't know, I said. My mouth was dry. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest like it was trying to break through my ribs. I had the truck in park, engine still running. For a split second, I thought about turning around, going back to see where it went. Then sanity kicked in. If that was what I thought it was, a young Bigfoot or Sasquatch or whatever you want to call it, then where were its parents? The thought of running into adult versions of that thing in the growing darkness made my blood run cold. We need to go now, I said, putting the truck in drive and stepping on the gas harder than I needed to. The tires spun in the gravel before catching, and we lurched forward. Maria was crying now, quiet sobs that she tried to muffle with her hand. "Did you see that thing?" she kept saying. "Did you see it? What was it? Dios mío, what was it?" "I don't know," I kept repeating, because what else could I say? I didn't know. I still don't know for sure, but I have my suspicions. We drove in silence for a while, both of us trying to process what we'd seen. The light was fading fast now, and every shadow along the roadside looked threatening. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something running after us. "It was eating that chicken," Maria finally said. Her voice was steadier now, but still tight with fear. "It must have raided that farmhouse's coop." That made sense. The chicken coop we'd passed just before the encounter. The thing must have broken in, grabbed a chicken, and was making its getaway when we came around the corner. "It looked like a kid," I said. "A kid in a costume or something." But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't right. No costume could move like that, so fluid and fast. And the way it leaped over that embankment, I'd never seen anything human move with that kind of agility. "It wasn't a kid," Maria said firmly. "It wasn't human at all." We drove straight home after that, not stopping anywhere. It was full dark by the time we got to Lompoc. My wife Elena was worried because we were later than expected, but we didn't tell her what had happened, not then. I wasn't sure what to say, and Maria and I exchanged a look that said we'd talk about it later. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing that thing's face when it looked up at us, the way its eyes reflected in our headlights. I remembered details I hadn't consciously noticed in the moment. How the hair on its body seemed thinner around its navel area, how its shoulders were broader than a human child's would be, how its movements were both animal-like and eerily human at the same time. The next morning, Maria and I talked while Elena was in the shower. We agreed on what we'd seen, down to the smallest details. It wasn't mass hysteria or one of us influencing the other's memory. We'd both seen the same thing. "We should report it," Maria suggested. "Call the sheriff or something." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "And tell them what? That we saw a baby Bigfoot eating a chicken on Vineyard Road. They'd think we were drunk or crazy or both." She knew I was right. Who would believe? Us? I didn't even know if I believed it myself, and I'd seen it with my own eyes. A few days later, I drove back out that way alone. I told myself I was just going to Paso Robles on an errand, but the truth is, I wanted to see that farmhouse again, maybe look around where the thing had disappeared. The farmhouse looked different in broad daylight. There was an old man in overalls working in the yard. I pulled over and got out, trying to look casual. "Afternoon," I called. He looked up, squinting at me suspiciously. Can't blame him. Strangers don't just stop by farmhouses in the middle of nowhere without a reason. "Something I can help you with?" he asked. I made up some story about being interested in the area, thinking about buying property. He seemed to relax a little. Had some trouble with predators lately, he mentioned when I asked how he liked living out here. Something's been getting at my chickens. Lost 3 last week. My skin prickled. What kind of predator? Coyote? He shook his head. Don't think so. Coyote would have left more of a mess. Whatever it is, it takes them whole. Just disappears with them. I wanted to tell him what we'd seen, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I asked, "You ever see anything strange around here? You know, unusual animals or anything?" He gave me an odd look. Like what? I don't know. Just anything out of the ordinary. He stared at me for a long moment, then said, "There's things in these hills that don't have names, mister. Been here 40 years, and there's places even I won't go after dark." He turned back to his work. "Good luck finding your property." I took the hint and left, but his words stayed with me. Things in these hills that don't have names. He knew something, or at least suspected. On the way back, I stopped where we'd seen the creature. In daylight, it was just an ordinary stretch of road. The embankment it had leaped over led down into a ravine thick with brush and trees. Perfect hiding. Place for something that didn't want to be found. I stood there for a while, looking down into those trees, feeling watched, even though I couldn't see anything moving. Eventually, I got back in my truck and drove home. I never went back there again. Maria went home to her husband a week later. Before she left, she made me promise not to tell Carlos what we'd seen. He wouldn't understand, she said. He'd think we were crazy or making it up. I agreed, and we didn't talk about it again for years. When we did finally bring it up at a family gathering in the 80s, we kept it light, like it was just a funny story about how we thought we saw something weird one time. Nobody took it seriously, which was probably for the best. But I know what I saw. It wasn't human, and it wasn't any known animal. The way it moved, the look in its eyes, there was intelligence there, and purpose. It wasn't just some mindless creature. It knew exactly what it was doing, raiding that chicken coop and making its escape. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd turned the truck around that night and followed it. Would I have seen where it lived? Would I have encountered its family, adult versions of that thing, 7 or 8 feet tall instead of 4? I'm glad I didn't find out. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, but I still think about it every time I drive through rural areas at dusk. I still scan the tree lines and the shadows beside the road, and I still remember those eyes reflecting in my headlights and the impossible speed and grace with which that creature disappeared into the darkness. I don't know what it was, but I know it was real, and I know it's still out there somewhere, in the hills of Central California, hiding from human eyes, coming out only when it thinks no one is watching. Growing bigger now, I suppose. Maybe it has children of its own. That's the thought that keeps me awake sometimes, even after all these years. Not that I saw something impossible, but that there's a whole hidden world right alongside ours, populated by creatures we're not supposed to know about. And sometimes, if you're in the wrong place at exactly the wrong time, the veil between those worlds slips just for a moment, and you see things you can never unsee. Story 13. I've been holding this in for over 40 years, but I need to get it off my chest. What I saw that day in 1979 on Nolan Road in Morrow, New York, has haunted me ever since. I've tried to make sense of it, tried to convince myself it was just a bear or some guy in a costume, but deep down, I know better. It was late October, around 4 in the afternoon. The trees were a mix of reds and oranges, but many had already lost their leaves. I remember because the bare branches made the woods look more exposed than usual, which makes what happened even stranger. My son Mikey was 7 at the time. His mom had asked me to take him for the afternoon since she needed to prepare for a job interview. We'd spent most of the day at a small fishing spot I knew, though we didn't catch much. Mikey had brought a Hardy Boys book and was more interested in reading than fishing anyway. We were heading home in my old Ford Fairmont. Nolan Road is notorious around here. Narrow, winding and dangerous even in good conditions. It runs along a steep descent toward the Hudson River with dense woods covering a sharp drop on the right and an even steeper cliff on the left that plunges straight down into more forest. You have to take it slow and stay focused. The heater in that old car never worked right, so I had a blanket over my lap. Mikey was in the back seat, still buried in his book. I remember the radio was playing some Eagles song, and I was keeping it low so it wouldn't distract me from the road. I was going maybe 20 miles an hour around a particularly tight bend when movement caught my eye on the right side of the road. At first I thought it was a deer. We get plenty of those jumping out in front of cars around here. But this was different. It came bursting out of the trees about 30 yards ahead of us. The thing was completely covered in dark hair. Not black, more of a deep brown but dirty looking. It was running on two legs but not like a person runs. The gait was all wrong. It moved with its arms swinging oddly, almost like a bear might if forced to walk upright, but more fluid, more natural. Like this was how it always moved. My foot immediately hit the brake, and the car started slowing, but this thing wasn't stopping. It sprinted straight across the road, right in front of our car. I'll never forget how fast it moved. We weren't going to hit it, but I was breaking out of pure shock. "Mikey, look!" I shouted, but by the time the words left my mouth, the thing had already reached the left side of the road. What it did next is what really gets me. Without breaking stride, without even a moment's hesitation, it leaped feet first over the drop-off on the left side, just launched itself into nothingness. That cliff drops at least 40 feet into thick forest. Nothing human would survive that jump, at least not without serious injuries. The whole thing lasted maybe 2 seconds. By the time Mikey looked up from his book, there was nothing to see. "What, Dad? What is it?" he asked, scrambling to look out the windows. I pulled the car to a complete stop, my hands shaking on the wheel. Did you see that?" I asked, already knowing he hadn't. "See what?" He pressed his face against the window, suddenly interested. My mind was racing. What the hell had I just witnessed? It was too big to be a dog or coyote, too agile to be a bear, and definitely not a person. It stood maybe 6 feet tall, but hunched forward as it ran. "I think I saw something run across the road," I said, not wanting to scare him, but also desperate to confirm I wasn't hallucinating. "Was it a deer?" Mikey asked, excited now. "No, I don't think so." I sat there for maybe 30 seconds, trying to process what I'd seen. The road was empty in both directions. The woods were silent, except for the occasional rustling of leaves in the breeze. "Let's go see if we can spot it again," I said, more to reassure myself than anything else. I put the car back in drive and continued down the road slowly. Around the next bend, the road leveled out a bit and ran alongside the river. I pulled over at a small clearing and turned off the engine. "Stay in the car," I told Mikey firmly. I rolled down my window and listened. Nothing but the gentle sound of the river and distant birds. "What did you see, Dad?" Mikey asked again, his book now forgotten on the seat beside him. I hesitated. "I'm not sure. It looked like a really big animal, running on 2 legs. Like Bigfoot?" His eyes widened. Mikey had recently discovered cryptids through a library book, and Bigfoot was his current obsession. "I don't know what it was," I said honestly, "but it was covered in hair and ran across the road really fast." We sat there for probably 20 minutes scanning the tree line. Part of me wanted to get out and investigate, to find some proof of what I'd seen, but a stronger part, the part responsible for keeping my son safe, kept me firmly in the driver's seat. Whatever that thing was, it moved through those woods like it owned them. I was just a visitor. Eventually, I started the car back up. "I think it's gone now," I said, trying to sound casual for Mikey's sake. Let's head home before it gets dark." The whole drive back, I kept replaying those 2 seconds in my mind. The way it moved wasn't right. It wasn't a person in a costume. The movements were too fluid, too natural. And that leap, no human would take that leap without knowing what was below. When we got home, Mikey immediately told his mum about how I'd seen maybe Bigfoot on Nolan Road. She gave me that look, the one that said, "Thanks for getting him worked up before bedtime," but I could only shrug. What could I say? I didn't know what I'd seen. That night, after Mikey was asleep, I tried to draw what I'd seen while it was still fresh in my mind. I'm no artist, but I needed to document it somehow. The proportions weren't quite human. Longer arms, broader shoulders, a slightly hunched posture even while running. The hair covered its entire body. I couldn't make out a face in that brief moment, just an impression of something dark where the face should be. I only told a few people about what happened. My brother thought I'd seen a bear with mange. My friend Bill, who worked as a forest ranger, suggested it might have been someone in hunting gear taking a shortcut. Neither explanation satisfied me. What I saw knew those woods intimately, knew exactly where to jump, knew there was a safe landing below. About 2 months later, around Christmas time, I was reading the Post-Star newspaper when a small article caught my eye. 2 teenage girls in Washington County, just north of us, reported seeing a hairy creature running through the woods near their home. The article was brief, just a few paragraphs, but it mentioned that when the sheriff's deputies investigated, one of them also claimed to have spotted something unusual moving through the trees. I cut out that article and kept it, though it's long since disappeared during a move. I've looked for archives of it online, but it seems like small local news from the late 70s just doesn't exist on the internet. For years afterward, I would drive that stretch of Nolan Road, hoping to see it again. Sometimes with Mikey, sometimes alone. I never did. Once, about a year later, I worked up the courage to park and hike down below that cliff, trying to find where it might have landed. The terrain was so rough and overgrown that I gave up after an hour. Whatever was down there, whatever path that thing knew, it wasn't meant for people like me to follow. Mikey's 30 now, with kids of his own. Sometimes when we get together, he'll bring up, "That time Dad thought he saw Bigfoot," and everyone laughs. I laugh too, but inside, I'm still wondering. I've read about Sasquatch sightings over the years, but most descriptions don't match what I saw. This wasn't some giant lumbering creature. It was agile, confident, and completely at home in an environment that would kill most humans who tried to navigate it at that speed. What's always stuck with me is how unafraid it was. It didn't hesitate when it saw our car. It didn't try to hide. It just continued on its way as if we were the ones who didn't belong there. And maybe we didn't. I'm 71 now, and I've never seen anything like it again. But I know what I saw that day wasn't a bear, wasn't a person, wasn't anything that should exist according to science. Sometimes I drive past that spot on Nolan Road, always slowing down at that particular bend. The forest has grown thicker over the years, reclaiming more of the roadside. I wonder if it's still out there, or others like it, moving through those woods with that strange, confident gait, completely hidden from our world, except for those rare, fleeting moments when our paths accidentally cross. I don't expect anyone to believe me. Hell, sometimes I barely believe it myself. But on cold October afternoons, when the leaves are falling and the woods look just a little more exposed than usual, I remember those 2 seconds on Nolan Road, and I know exactly what I saw, even if I'll never understand what it was. Story 14. I've never been the type to believe in the supernatural or unexplained. Growing up in rural areas, I've always considered myself pretty level-headed about wildlife. But what happened last spring has completely changed everything I thought I knew about these woods. It was early April, 2023, just another Tuesday morning at our place near the edge of the Cascades in northern Washington. We've lived on this property for 6 years now, far enough from town to enjoy the quiet, but close enough that we don't feel completely isolated. My partner Thomas was still sleeping, and I was doing my usual morning routine. Around 5:30 in the morning, I opened our back door to let the dogs out. We have 2 German shepherds, Ranger and Luna, who are normally fearless. I'm talking about dogs who've chased black bears off our property and once held their ground against a mountain lion until I could get my gun. They're not easily spooked. The morning was crisp, that perfect Pacific Northwest spring where everything smells like wet earth and pine. The sun wasn't quite up yet, just that blue-gray light before dawn. I remember noticing how quiet it was. No birds singing, no wind rustling the trees. I should have recognized that silence as the first warning sign. The dogs bolted out like they always do, racing into the yard to mark their territory and check for any overnight visitors. I was just standing there on the back steps, sipping my coffee, when suddenly both dogs stopped dead in their tracks about 30 feet out. Their hackles shot up like I've never seen before. Then they did something that made my blood run cold. They turned and sprinted back toward the house, literally pushing past me to get inside. Luna was whimpering, and Ranger, who never makes a sound unless there's a real threat, was making this low growl deep in his chest. That's when I saw it. About 50 feet away, right where our cleared property meets the tree line, stood something I still struggled to describe. At first, my brain tried to categorize it as a bear standing on its hind legs, but I knew immediately that wasn't right. This thing was standing fully upright, completely vertical, at least 7 or 8 feet tall, maybe taller. It was covered in thick, shaggy hair. Not fur exactly, but more like human hair that had grown wild. The color was this dark brownish black, and the hair looked to be about 4 to 6 inches long all over its body. Despite looking wild, the creature didn't appear mangy or unhealthy. In fact, it looked powerful, muscular. I couldn't move. I literally felt frozen in place, like my feet had grown roots into the wooden steps. My coffee mug slipped from my hand and shattered on the steps, but I barely registered the sound. Then it turned and looked directly at me. That's when it screamed. God, that sound. It wasn't like anything I've ever heard in these woods before, and I've heard just about everything. Cougars screaming at night, elk bugling, even the weird sounds foxes make during mating season. This was different. It wasn't a roar or a howl. It was a scream that started deep and guttural before rising into something that vibrated in the air. The sound physically hit me. I don't mean that metaphorically. I felt it strike my chest like someone had swung a hammer into my sternum. My ears rang and tears immediately sprang to my eyes without any conscious thought. It triggered something primal in me, a fear response so deep that my body reacted before my mind could even process what was happening. I remember my knees nearly buckling, and I had to grab the porch railing to stay upright. I couldn't even think about running inside. I was just frozen. For what felt like forever but was probably only 15 seconds, we stared at each other. That's when I noticed its face wasn't fully covered in hair. The face had this dark, blackish-brown skin, almost like leather that had been out in the sun too long. And the features, that's what keeps me up at night even now. They were disturbingly human-like. It had a broad, flat nose and deep-set eyes under a pronounced brow ridge. I couldn't make out the eye color from that distance, but they reflected the dim morning light in a way that made them look almost amber. Its chest was massive, wide and powerful, with what looked like distinct pectoral muscles. Actually, the way they were shaped made me think it might have been female, possibly even with breasts, though the hair made it difficult to be certain. The shoulders were incredibly broad, probably twice the width of mine. After what felt like an eternity of this standoff, it simply turned away. That's when I noticed how it moved. There was nothing awkward or animal-like about its gait. It walked with confidence, its arms swinging naturally at its sides. I could see the muscles working beneath the hair as it moved, powerful and deliberate. It didn't crash through the underbrush or run away. It just calmly walked down the hill and into the thicker forest, like it was taking a morning stroll. The whole encounter probably lasted less than 2 minutes, but it felt like hours. When I could finally move again, I backed into the house, slammed the door, and locked it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the deadbolt. I slid down with my back against the door until I was sitting on the floor. The dogs were hiding under the dining table, still whimpering. Thomas came downstairs a few minutes later, looking confused and half asleep. He asked if I was okay, and I just couldn't find the words at first. When I finally managed to tell him what I'd seen, he told me he'd heard the scream from bed, but had just gone back to sleep. We've heard strange noises out here before, especially at night, so he hadn't thought much of it. That's when I remembered what happened a few weeks earlier. Our friend Mike had stayed overnight in our guest room. Around 3 in the morning, we were all woken up by a similar scream coming from the woods. Thomas and I had just looked at each other and gone back to sleep. It wasn't the first time we'd heard strange sounds out here, but Mike had been absolutely terrified. The next morning, he admitted he'd slept with his loaded pistol on the nightstand and left, earlier than planned. He seemed genuinely shaken, but wouldn't elaborate on why that particular sound had scared him so badly. Since moving here, we've experienced all sorts of strange things that we've mostly brushed off. There have been nights when we've heard what sounds like rocks landing on our metal roof, distinct pings, followed by the sound of something rolling down the slope. We've heard rhythmic knocking sounds from the forest, almost like someone hitting trees with a stick in a specific pattern. Sometimes the forest goes completely silent, like someone hit a mute button on all wildlife. Our dogs' behavior has changed over the years too. When we first moved here, they would roam our entire 5 acres without hesitation. Now there are times when they refuse to go more than a few feet from the porch. On those nights, even calling them doesn't work. They'll just stand at the edge of the steps, hackles raised, staring into the darkness. After my encounter, I decided to ask around about local legends. We have a good relationship with some of the native elders in the area, and one of them, Joseph, is a regular at the small hardware store where I work part-time. Without telling him what I'd seen, I asked if there were any stories about creatures in these particular woods. The look he gave me was enough to make my skin crawl. He asked if I'd heard the screams yet. When I nodded, he sighed and told me about what his people call either Wendigo or Stick Indians, depending on the tribe. He said they're known to mimic voices, throw rocks at homes, and make strange knocking sounds in the forest. He warned me not to let children outside at night when the screams start, and to bring in pets before dark. Joseph's family has lived in this region for generations. They know the land, the animals, the weather patterns. When someone with that kind of knowledge tells you something with complete conviction, it's hard to dismiss. I've gone back and forth about what I saw that morning. I've tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear with mange. Maybe it was some kind of hallucination brought on by stress or lack of sleep. But I know what I saw. I was less than 50 feet away from it. I saw its face. I felt its scream hit my body like a physical force. It's been 4 months since that morning. We haven't moved, though I've thought about it. Thomas thinks I saw a bear, despite my insistence otherwise. He reminds me that the human mind tries to make patterns and see human features where there aren't any. Maybe he's right, but that doesn't explain the dog's behavior or the continuing strange occurrences. Just last week, I found 3 large rocks stacked on our back steps when I went to let the dogs out in the morning. Thomas swears he didn't put them there, and we live too far from the road for it to be neighborhood kids playing pranks. The dogs still refuse to go out alone at dawn or dusk. Luna whimpers when the forest goes quiet. Ranger stands guard at the windows at night, staring into the darkness. I don't go into the woods alone anymore. I carry bear spray even just to check the mail at the end of our long driveway. I've installed motion sensor lights around the entire property. Some nights I wake up to that silence, the unnatural quiet that seems to swallow all other sounds. I lie there listening, waiting for the scream or the knocks or the sound of rocks on the roof. Sometimes they come, sometimes they don't. But I know something is out there, watching our home, maybe trying to communicate in its own way. I don't know what I encountered that morning. I don't know if it meant harm or was simply curious about the humans living on the edge of its territory. But I know what I saw was real, and no amount of rational explanation will ever convince me otherwise. Story 15. I still can't explain what happened that day in August of 2006. It's been nearly 18 years, and I've gone through every possible explanation in my head thousands of times, but nothing makes sense. I've avoided talking about it because people either think I'm making it up or they try to explain it away with some rational explanation that just doesn't fit what we experienced. My stepson Mike and his girlfriend Sarah had been begging me to take them fishing all summer. I'd finally gotten a week off work, so we packed up my Ford F-150 with our gear and hitched up my 16-foot aluminum fishing boat to the trailer. We were headed to Port Renfrew on Vancouver Island for some salmon fishing and crabbing. I'd been going there for years and knew all the good spots. The drive started out perfectly normal. We left our place in Victoria around 3 in the afternoon. It was one of those perfect summer days. Clear blue sky, about 25 degrees, not too hot. The kind of day that makes you glad to be alive. We took the Pacific Marine route, which winds through some pretty remote areas. If you've never been there, it's dense forest on both sides for miles, with these massive trees that make you feel tiny. Cell service is basically non-existent once you get past Souk. We'd been on the road for about an hour and a half when we passed the Misachi Lake turnoff. For those who don't know the area, once you get past that point, the road gets narrower and rougher. It's paved but barely maintained in some sections. You're really out in the wilderness. About 20 kilometers past the turnoff, I felt the trailer bounce a little harder than it should have over a pothole. I'm always paranoid about towing. I've seen too many accidents from poorly secured loads. So I pulled over onto this old logging road to check everything. Just gonna make sure the boat's still tied down tight. I called back to Mike and Sarah as I hopped out. The logging road wasn't much more than a dirt path cutting into the trees, but it was wide enough for the truck and trailer. Did a quick walk around, checked all the tie-downs, made sure the winch strap was tight and that the safety chain was properly attached. Everything looked perfect. The boat was secured exactly as it should be. I got back in the truck and we continued down the main road. Not even 300 meters later, Mike asked if we could stop so he could change the CD. I remember rolling my eyes, kids and their music, but I pulled over onto another little side road, put the truck in park, and engaged the parking brake. It was starting to get dusky, maybe around 7:30 in the evening by this point. I remember checking my watch and thinking we'd get to our cabin just before dark if we kept a good pace. Mike was flipping through his CD case, while Sarah was showing me something on her digital camera, pictures from their hike the previous weekend. The dome light was on, engine idling, radio playing quietly. Just a normal moment on a normal road trip. That's when it happened. The entire truck suddenly lurched sideways, hard, like we'd been T-boned by another vehicle, except there was absolutely nothing there. It wasn't a gentle movement. It was violent enough that my head nearly hit the side window and Sarah's camera flew out of her hands. "What the hell?" Mike shouted. "Dad, did you put it in park?" "Of course I did," I snapped back, grabbing the wheel instinctively even though we weren't moving forward. I checked the shifter. It was definitely in park and the parking brake was still engaged. The engine was still running and we hadn't rolled anywhere. We just moved sideways. Before I could process what was happening, it happened again, a powerful force shoving the entire truck and trailer from the passenger side, rocking us toward the driver's side. Sarah screamed from the back seat. "Something's pushing the trailer. It's pushing it toward the ditch." I whipped around to look out the back window, but in the fading light I couldn't see anything clearly, just the outline of my boat and the trees beyond. "What do you see?" I asked, my voice sounding strange even to myself. "I don't know." Sarah was pressed against the opposite window now. "I can't see anything, but something's pushing us." The truck rocked a third time, even harder. I could hear the metal of the trailer hitch groaning under strain. My first thought was earthquake or landslide, but the ground itself wasn't moving, just us. And not forward or backward like you'd expect if the brake failed. Sideways, like something massive was physically shoving us. "Go, just go," Mike yelled. I didn't need to be told twice. I slammed the truck into drive and floored it. The tires spun for a second before catching, and we shot forward onto the main road. I didn't slow down for at least 5 kilometers, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, constantly checking the rearview mirror, though I wasn't sure what I was looking for. When we finally pulled over again, we were all breathing hard. It was almost fully dark now. "What the actual hell was that?" Mike asked, his voice shaky. "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe a bear. Could a bear rock a truck like that?" But even as I said it, I knew it made no sense. No bear is strong enough to rock a 3-ton truck and trailer sideways. And why wouldn't we have seen it? Sarah was still looking pale. "The boat doesn't look right," she said, pointing out her window. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment and got out to check. In the beam of light, I could see the boat had definitely shifted on the trailer. It was sitting at a slight angle now, not centered like it should be. But we were all exhausted and spooked, and the cabin was only another 40 minutes away. I decided we'd check it properly in the morning. When daylight came, the damage was worse than I'd realized. The main safety latch that keeps the boat secured to the winch post was stretched and completely non-functional. The nylon winch strap had split halfway through. The rear, tie-downs, heavy-duty ratchet straps rated for serious weight, were torn and stretched like rubber bands, and the boat itself had shifted several inches on the trailer, now sitting crookedly. "Jesus," Mike whispered when he saw it. "What could do this?" I've been around boats and trailers my whole life. The force needed to cause that kind of damage would be enormous. We're talking thousands of pounds of lateral pressure. It wasn't just a bump or a jostle. Something had tried to rip my boat off the trailer. We still went fishing that week, though none of us really felt like it anymore. We had to retie everything, and I jury-rigged the winch strap with some heavy-duty rope I had in my emergency kit. But the mood was different. We kept looking over our shoulders. We didn't stay out past dusk. The strangest part came on our drive home. We passed through that same stretch of road. I made sure it was daylight this time, and there was absolutely nothing unusual about it. No evidence of any landslide or earth movement, no fallen trees, nothing that could explain what happened to us. If it had been a bear, there would have been claw marks on the boat or trailer. There weren't any. And again, no bear on earth could generate enough force to rock a parked truck sideways. Not even a grizzly. I've gone over it in my head 1,000,000 times. Earthquake? The news would have reported it, and it wouldn't just affect our vehicle. Mechanical failure of some kind doesn't explain the sideways motion or the damage to the boat ties. Another vehicle hitting us. We would have seen headlights, heard an engine, seen damage to the truck itself. There was none. The only explanation that keeps coming back to me is one I don't want to consider. Something was out there in those woods. Something big enough and strong enough to push a truck and trailer. Something that didn't want us there. I've never gone back to that stretch of road. I've taken different routes to Port Renfrew since then, even though it adds an hour to the drive. Mike and Sarah broke up a year later, and she moved back east. Last time I talked to her, she mentioned she doesn't go camping anymore. Can't say I blame her. I don't have any fancy conclusion or explanation for what happened to us that August evening in 2006. Sometimes I almost convince myself it was just some freak occurrence with a natural explanation. But then I remember the feeling of that truck being shoved sideways, the sound of the metal groaning, and Sarah's terrified voice saying, "Something's pushing the trailer." Whatever it was real, and I still can't explain it. Story 16. I've never really told this story outside of my close friends and family. Even now, 2 years later, I get goosebumps thinking about it. but I need to get this off my chest, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar. This happened in Knox Township, Guernsey County, in the Olive Green area. Anyone who's from around here knows it's mostly rural. Lots of farmland, woods, and not much else. I've lived here my whole life, and you get used to the quiet, the darkness at night, and all the weird sounds that come with country living. My buddy Jake and I were just hanging out one Friday night in October. It was around 11:30 or so, and we were bored as hell. That's just how it is out here. Not much to do except cruise around back roads, maybe find a spot to park and shoot the shit for a while. We were in my Chevy Blazer, not a new one, mind you. This was a '98 model I'd fixed up myself. Dark green, lifted about 3 inches, with some decent all-terrains on it. Not the prettiest thing, but reliable. We ended up on this old dirt road that cuts through a patch of woods between 2 cornfields. The harvest was done already, so it was just empty fields on either side before you hit the tree line. This road isn't even on most maps. It's one of those places locals know about. We'd been there plenty of times before, usually just to park and talk or listen to music without anyone bothering us. I pulled over to the side, keeping the engine running because it was getting chilly. The headlights were on, pointing down this narrow dirt path that disappeared into the trees about 50 yards ahead. Jake was scrolling through his phone, showing me some stupid videos, and I was reaching for my cigarettes in my jacket pocket. I remember every detail of what happened next. It's burned into my memory. I had just put a cigarette between my lips and was fumbling with my lighter when the truck shifted. At first, I thought we'd hit a soft spot in the dirt and were sinking a bit on one side. But then there was this pressure. The entire left side of my Blazer started rising off the ground. Not just a little bounce like you'd get from someone jumping on the bumper or rocking it. The whole damn driver's side was lifting up. The headlights, which had been pointing straight ahead down the path, suddenly angled upward toward the tree branches. I dropped my lighter and cigarette and grabbed the steering wheel out of instinct, like that would somehow keep us grounded. Jake stopped mid-sentence and his phone fell from his hand. "What the fuck?" he shouted, bracing himself against the dashboard. The truck kept tilting. Through my window, I could now see the ground below us. We were being lifted higher, maybe 2 feet, then 3. The sensation was unlike anything I've ever felt. It wasn't like being on a car lift in a garage where it's even. This was just the left side going up, making us tilt at a crazy angle. I looked out my window, expecting to see, I don't know what. A tow truck? A crane? Something that would explain what was happening. But there was nothing there, just darkness. That's when true panic set in. Whatever was lifting us wasn't visible. "Start the fucking truck! Go! Go!" I screamed at Jake, who was in the passenger seat. In my panic, I'd forgotten the engine was already running. Jake lunged across me and shifted into reverse, slamming his foot onto the clutch. I could hear the rear tires spinning uselessly in the air. They were making that high-pitched whine tires make when they're not touching ground. We were tilted at almost a 45-degree angle by now, and I was pressed hard against my door, gravity pulling me down while Jake was practically falling on top of me. The headlights were now pointing at the tops of the trees, illuminating branches and leaves instead of the path ahead. The beam shook as the whole vehicle trembled. There was a creaking sound coming from the frame of the truck, like metal under stress. "What's happening? What the fuck is happening?" Jake kept yelling. I couldn't answer him. I was frozen, staring out my window at the empty space where something should have been visible, something that could lift a 2-ton vehicle. The lifting stopped when we were about 2 meters off the ground on the driver's side. The truck was at such an angle that anything not secured was sliding across the cab. My phone, some loose change, an empty soda can, all piling up against the driver's door along with me. For what felt like forever, but was probably just 10 or 15 seconds, we hung there, engine running, tires spinning, both of us in complete panic. I remember the sound most clearly, the engine revving, tires spinning, and underneath it all, a strange sound I still can't properly describe. Like heavy breathing, but deeper, more resonant. It wasn't coming from inside the cab. It seemed to be coming from directly outside my door. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the pressure released. Not all at once, like dropping us. It was controlled. The truck lowered back to the ground with a heavy bounce on its suspension. The moment all 4 tires touched dirt, Jake slammed the truck into first gear and floored it. We shot forward down that dirt path, fishtailing wildly, headlights bouncing as we hit every rut and hole. I remember looking in the side mirror, desperately trying to see what had been there, but all I could make out was darkness and the dust cloud we were kicking up behind us. We didn't stop until we hit pavement, about a mile away. Jake pulled over, and we both just sat there, breathing hard, not saying a word. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I couldn't even light the cigarette I so desperately needed. "Did you see anything?" I finally asked him. Jake shook his head. "Nothing. Fucking nothing. But something had to be there. Something strong enough to lift your truck like it was a toy." We drove straight to my place after that. Neither of us wanted to be alone, and we stayed up all night, jumping at every sound outside. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was some kind of freak mini tornado, a sinkhole forming and then collapsing, but we both knew better. Something had deliberately lifted my truck and then set it down. The next morning, in broad daylight, we got my cousin Mike to come with us back to the spot. I didn't want to go, but I needed to know if there was any evidence, any explanation. The dirt road looked completely normal. There were our tire tracks from speeding away, and the spot where we'd been parked was visible from the compressed soil. But there were no giant footprints, no strange markings, nothing unusual at all, except for one thing. On the rear bumper of my Blazer, on the driver's side, there were 2 distinct marks. They looked like handprints, but way too big to be human. Each one was maybe 15 inches from thumb to pinky, pressed into the metal deeply enough to leave an impression. The metal was actually deformed, with 5 finger-like indentations. Mike suggested it might have been from previous damage I hadn't noticed, but I keep my truck in good shape. Those marks hadn't been there the day before. I'm certain of it. We took photos, but they didn't really capture the depth of the impressions. Within a week, I'd replaced the bumper. I couldn't stand looking at those handprints every time I walked to my truck. After that night, I started hearing stories from other locals about strange things in the Olive Green area. A farmer who found his tractor moved from where he'd parked it, hunters describing weird sounds in the woods that didn't match any known animal. Someone's dog refusing to go near a certain patch of forest, growling and backing away no matter how much they tried to coax it. I want to make it absolutely clear, Jake and I weren't drinking that night. We weren't high. We were just 2 bored guys hanging out, and something impossible happened to us. I've gone over it 1,000 times in my head. What if we'd turned off the engine? What if we'd been completely silent? Would it have done more than just lift the truck? Was it curious about us, or playing with us like a kid with a toy? I still drive that same Blazer, but I've never gone back to that dirt road. Jake moved away 6 months after it happened, clear across the state. He said it wasn't related, but we both know it was. Every time we talked after that night, the conversation eventually circled back to what happened, and neither of us had any answers. I still live in Knox Township, but I don't drive the back roads at night anymore. I stick to main highways, well-lit streets. I don't park anywhere isolated after dark. Sometimes I catch myself looking in my side mirror while driving, half expecting to see something massive keeping pace with my truck. Sometimes when I'm in bed at night, I think I hear that same deep, resonant breathing outside my window. Whatever lifted my truck that night is still out there. I don't know what it was. Some undiscovered animal, a person with impossible strength, or something else entirely, but it was real. It was strong enough to lift a 2-ton vehicle with apparent ease, and it let us go when it could have done much worse. That's my story. Believe it or don't, but I know what happened. I know what I felt and what I saw, and I know those handprints on my bumper didn't make themselves.